To statements on fisheries, I now call on Minister of State Timmy Dooley to make a statement under Standing Order 56, not more than 35 minutes. Minister.
Thanks very much. I will try not to use the full time because I'm conscious that quite a number of members want to get in, so I will facilitate that.
Thank you.
That's helpful. First of all, I want to thank the deputies for seeking the opportunity for statements on fishing. I think it's timely considering the recent developments in relation to the discussions and negotiations for fishing opportunities for 2026, but also to discuss other important issues and concerns affecting the fisheries sector. I will deal with the recent developments for the pelagic stock first. On September the 30th, ICES, the International Council for Exploration of the Seas, published deeply concerning advice for widely distributed pelagic stock in 2026. The advice recommended a 70% reduction in the total allowable catch for mackerel in 26, as well as a reduction of 41% for blue whiting and 22% for boarfish. Regarding mackerel, this follows a reduction last year of 22% compared with advice for 2024, and also on top of a 26% reduction as a result of Brexit. The Celtic Sea whitefish fleet faces an even bleaker prospect, with cod, haddock and whiting quotas facing zero catch recommendations. What is facing the Irish fleet in 26, I think, is a reduction of opportunities right across the sector, and we must consider the socio-economic implications of these recommendations. If the cuts proposed are translated into fishing opportunities for 2026, this will challenge the economic viability and the scale of the Irish catching sector. These cuts will starve fish processing business of raw material. It will impact the services industry that support the seafood sector in coastal communities. Service industries, including engineering, net menders and factories that have built up over 50 years around ports like Killybegs and Castletownbere. Following the publication of the advice, I met with fishermen and women in Killybegs on Sunday the 5th of October to hear those concerns. They are very clear that years of unchecked overfishing by Norway, Iceland and the Faroes and the Russian Federation have pushed mackerel to the brink. The North Atlantic Pelagic Advisory Group, NAPA, represents global seafood buyers and retailers, confirms that over 1 million tonnes of mackerel have been caught above scientific advice over the past 5 years. And this is not a new problem. It is a failure of enforcement. On the 8th of October, I met with relevant stakeholder groups as part of the annual Sustainability Impact Assessment process, and this provided a further opportunity to discuss the scientific advice. The issue of unsustainable fishing of key pelagic stocks such as mackerel by certain coastal states outside the EU has been raised by Ireland repeatedly over the years. At the Agriculture and Fisheries Council in June and again in September, I highlighted Ireland's concerns regarding Norway's actions in setting excessive and unsustainable mackerel quotas. We could be looking at even more serious scenario in 2027 for mackerel, so it is important that we take a coordinated approach now. We cannot accept a business-as-usual approach in dealing with Norway. The EU Commission needs to identify and adapt suitable measures to respond to this crisis and to bring forward measures regarding third countries which fail to cooperate and that allow unsustainable fishing of stocks of common interest to the European Union. There are tools under Regulation 1026/2012 to impose trade restrictions on countries undermining stocks. The programme for government recognises the valuable role of fisheries in this country and the communities that rely on this activity for their livelihoods. Furthermore, it notes the commitment of this government to defend Irish interests in the context of fisheries negotiations between the EU and third countries. Last week, I presented the Sustainability Impact Assessment to the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Fisheries and Maritime Affairs. This assessment, which involves a public consultation process along with expert contributions from the Marine Institute and BIM, is an essential step in Ireland's preparation for the autumn negotiations on fishing opportunities for the forthcoming year. The Sustainability Impact Assessment highlights the potential for significant impacts on the Irish fishing industry. And while we have seen clearly the potential impact on the catching sector, the recent ICES advice, particularly in respect of mackerel, is of significant concern to a number of processors who process pelagic fish and ship their product to markets across the world. Mackerel is Ireland's most valuable catch, worth about 94 million in exports last year to premium European and Asian markets, and it's now below the safe biological limits. Next week, together with colleagues I will visit China on a trade mission to support that fishing sector together with pork and dairy products. It is a very important market for us, and one which, with the assistance of Board BIA, we continue to promote. The pelagic processors account for 122 million of the 947 million value of the overall sector, and 10 of the 95 seafood processing companies in the industry. Together with departmental officials, Board Isquiwara and Board BIA, we will work together with the pelagic processors to fully assess and analyse the impact of reductions that will take effect in 2026, and to identify ways in which these processors may be supported. In the meantime, a range of supports continue to be available to the sector to support seafood promotion, capacity building, new product development, new market opportunities and capital investment. And as I said, I am visiting China next week. Our seafood exports to China are particularly strong, showing growth of more than 50% year to date. I'm committed to working across government departments to assess what supports may be available to the seafood sector in this very difficult context. And obviously, I've had discussions with the EU Commissioner for Fisheries and Oceans. I've raised the matter with the Taoiseach, and I intend to have further conversations with him. Senior Minister Hayden is here, and he has been appraised of the issues, and together we will work to try to assist in so far as possible. Minister for Public Expenditure, Infrastructure, Public Service and Reform and Digitisation too has been briefed on this, as has, I know, the Taoiseach been briefed by people from the sector, to explore options within the constraints of both the EU and national exchequer funding and the relevant EU and national legislation, and in particular taking account of the constraints imposed by the EU state aid rules. I'm acutely aware too that it is fish processors require, not handouts. The reality of the situation requires emergency interventions. I've spoken to fisheries ministers in other member states since my appointment, and I have consistently worked towards building common positions on issues that are of relevance, of course, to our sector here and to the specifics of our sector. A strong and common European position is in the best interests of all fishing parties, and it is critical to ensure these stocks are fished in a sustainable manner and that comprehensive agreements can be reached governing fishing opportunities for the coming year. Also of paramount importance is that third countries do not set unjust unilateral quotas that deplete this precious resource. While the current emerging situation is extremely challenging, I wish to reassure the House that as Minister of State with special responsibility for fisheries and the marine, I recognise the importance of maintaining a vibrant fishing sector, both for the communities that rely on them and the wider economy. The programme for government, Securing Ireland's Future, reflects this approach by committing to securing a sustainable future for the fisheries sector while supporting coastal communities that rely on this activity for their livelihood. To reflect for a moment amid the current challenges, I'd like to refer to BIM's Business of Seafood Report 2024. And this offers a comprehensive assessment of the economic impact of the seafood sector. The report tells us that the Irish seafood industry is valued at 1.24 billion. That's an increase of 4% on 2023. Now, I'm conscious that some of these numbers can be somewhat distorting of the facts, particularly when we're facing a crisis like that. But it is important to put those headline figures on the record. The sector employs almost 8,000 people directly across fishing, aquaculture and processing, and a total of almost 17,000 people when indirect employment is included. Fish landings in Ireland were valued at 461 million in 2024, with 325 million coming from the Irish vessels and 136 million from non-Irish vessels. The report shows a value growth of 25% in the aquaculture sector, which is also encouraging. And I have made it a feature of the role that I hold to try to see where we can continue to grow the aquaculture sector, and I'm conscious that the licensing issue currently is an impediment in that regard, and working with officials in our department, we're working to try to find a resolution to that so that we can ensure that where possible the aquaculture sector is explored to the greatest opportunity and extent possible in a positive way that can ensure that we will get increased exports and additional employment at home at a time while we're facing very particular constraints within the catching sector for those pelagic stocks. These metrics clearly demonstrate that resilience of the sector despite the significant challenges in recent years and its capacity to pivot and adjust to a changing environment. This progress would not be possible without strategic and well-targeted investment, both public and private. And I do also want to recognise the appetite for the investment community to continue to put monies back into this sector, and that's really needs to be recognised and welcomed. Through the Seafood Development Programme, the Government is delivering essential support to strengthen competitiveness and support sustainability and employment across the sector. More generally, funding for supports for the commercial seafood sector are provided under the Seafood Development Programme. The programme is co-funded by the Irish Government and the EU Commission under the European Maritime Fisheries and Aquaculture Fund, MFAF 2021 to 2027. Schemes for industry under the STP are primarily implemented by BIM, or Bord the Ishkiwara. Separately to the STP, the Department also funds, supports and services provided by Bord Bia and the agri-food sector, including seafood. These are assessed by seafood processors, in particular marketing, innovation and new product development, etc. Funding supports are also provided to the commercial seafood sector by Enterprise Ireland and Údarás na Gaeltachta. 14 schemes have been or will be implemented by BIM this year on behalf of our department under the SDP, and the majority of these are co-funded under MFAF. 2 are exchequer funded, specifically the fleet safety and marine tourism schemes. Many of you are aware that I have placed a heavy emphasis on personal engagement with the seafood sector since I was appointed to this role in February. The engagement has never been more important than it is now, and I'm finding industry representatives more united than ever before. They make their case with professionalism and clarity, and I do want to thank the way in which they have engaged with me and the department over recent months, particularly at a time of great crisis for them, and I can understand their frustration at times, but at all times their professionalism and their steadfastness in a desire to work through the current crisis. The Programme for Government commits to publish a 5-year fisheries sector strategy that will include an examination of the processing sector and to continue to support and promote improvements in fisheries and aquaculture. Now, to progress this, I have engaged a facilitator, Mr. Kieran Mulvey, to work with seafood representative groups in order to identify and articulate issues, priorities and opportunities for the sector. These will be considered when I'm setting the terms of reference for fisheries sector strategy. Mr. Mulvey is currently engaged in a series of meetings with stakeholders, and I look forward to meeting with him to consider his insights as the development of a strategy for the long-term future of the fisheries sector has never been more important. And to that extent, we expect to be finalising that work in the coming months, and I want to thank the sector generally who have engaged with Mr. Mulvey over the summer months and more recently in an effort to put in place a capacity to facilitate and understand and try to bring forward a comprehensive strategy there. The allocation of stocks between Member States was established as a principle of the first CFP in 1983 and was based on the average catch of Member States over a period of reference years, which is referred to as track record. The only exemption to this relates to the Hague preferences based on a special recognition agreement of the underdeveloped nature of the Irish fleet and the heavy control responsibility on us when Ireland joined the EU. This arrangement is a mechanism for limited increase in the annual quotas for Irish fishermen. Any changes to the existing system of quota allocations would require a majority of Member States to agree under the qualified majority voting system. And I know that deputies will be aware that this would require other Member States to give up existing quota shares. Any change to relative stability would involve a loss for some other Member States and therefore possess particular challenges in a qualified majority voting context. And I'm also conscious that there are some countries that don't fish their entire quota allocation but retain them anyway. And I think I'd like to see that change, but I'm conscious of the challenges associated with that. But I would hope that any review of the CFP, that we could have a more fair and balanced approach and a more collegial approach at European level to trying to find solutions that benefit all of us. But I caveat all of that by saying in negotiations it's a challenge, but I certainly won't be found wanting, and with the support of Senior Minister Hayden we will fight the case of Irish fishermen and women to the greatest extent possible, and notwithstanding our full understanding of the constraints that we face. But notwithstanding this, as I said, I will use all opportunities to seek additional access to quota for Irish fishing fleet where this is possible. In 2024, Ireland successfully invoked the Hague preferences for mackerel. This is the first time that the Hagues had successfully been invoked for this species. This has caused a considerable amount of disquiet amongst the impacted member states, and I anticipate strong opposition in the December Council. And to that extent, a number of member states have sought, and we have afforded, bilateral discussions with them, either through their embassies or directly with relevant ministers. But we have, at every possible opportunity, set out the importance of this mechanism for us to protect our sector. I believe we will need to invoke the Hague preference mechanism to protect Ireland's share of key stocks through a coordinated and all-of-government approach at EU level. And it's for that instance that Minister Hayden and I are engaging with our colleagues here in government so that we can use whatever other contacts are there at member state level to try to ensure that we get what's required in the December Council. The last issue I'd like to update you on today is the review of trawling inside 6. The programme for government commits to maintaining support for our important inshore fishing sector and promoting the sustainability of fish stocks. And in December 2018, a transition period to a ban on vessels over 18 metres trawling inshore waters within the 6 nautical mile zone and the baselines was announced. The measure, however, was the subject of extended legal proceedings, resulting in the measure being overturned in 2023. In February 24, the then Minister for Agriculture, Food and the Marine held a new public consultation on a review of trawling activity inside the 6 nautical mile zone and baselines. This consultation took place without prejudice to what went before, and over 5,500 submissions were received. These submissions, along with updated scientific and economic advice from the Marine Institute and Bord Iascaigh Mhara, were used to inform a review of trawling activity inside the 6 nautical mile zone and baselines. Together with Minister Hayden, we carefully considered all issues before making a decision, and given the history of litigation in relation to this matter, it was critical that all the necessary procedural and legal steps were taken. So on the 30th of September, I signed a Policy Directive 1 of 2025 to give legal effect to the decision that Minister Hayden and I announced on the 22nd of July last to place certain restrictions on trawling activity by larger vessels, and that is vessels over 18 metres in length, inside the 6 nautical mile zone and the baselines. So on the 1st of October 2026, trawling activity, that is the operation of trawl or seine nets by fishing vessels over 18 metres in length, overall inside the 6 nautical mile zones and the baselines, will be prohibited. In addition, a catch limit of 2,000 tonnes of sprat will be permitted for vessels over 18 metres in length inside, as I said, the 6 nautical miles and the baselines from the 11th of October of this year to the 30th of September next year. There has been much commentary on sprat, and I can confirm at this time there is no proposals from the European Commission for a total allowable catch and a quota management arrangement for sprat in the waters around Ireland. Ireland will, of course, have regard for a possible TAC and quota regime or other appropriate conservation measures going forward, if recommended in the scientific advice to support the sustainable management of sprat. This government has committed to maintaining support for our inshore sector in the programme for government, and I have no plans at this time to introduce a sprat quota limit for vessels under 18 metres. The decision that I took was to support the smaller fleet and those deriving an income from those inshore waters within 6 nautical miles. The new restrictions apply, as I said, to larger vessels only, and I'm confident that restricting trawling access to the 6 nautical mile zone to smaller vessels was the right decision to help to deliver on the promise made by this government and the previous one to support our crucial inshore fishing sector. I'm mindful of the opportunity that these measures will provide for our important small-scale fishermen and women, and I'm confident that these measures will help to re-establish links between local fish resources, local fleets and local communities. Thank you very much, and I look forward to listening with intent to the rest of the debate.
Thank you, Minister. And now I call on Pat Cope Gallagher.
Thank you, Can Corla, and I'm very pleased that the House has agreed to the statements at this very appropriate time prior to the run-in to the December Council and the negotiations that will take place, particularly at coastal states over the next number of weeks. I do believe, and I'm in this House since '81, except for a few short periods, that the worst fishing crisis we're going to experience it since the foundation of the state, unless something drastic happens in the next few weeks. I can only describe it as the real Armageddon, with no sector safe from the impacts and devastating fallout that will follow. Over the last 5 years, Norway, Iceland and Faroes have overfished mackerel by 1 million, 1 million tonnes of mackerel. Some years Norway alone would have overfished by 55%. And these are the countries that are telling us that we need to have a sustainable fishery, and we are the custodians, and we must ensure that there are stocks there for future. But that's not the way that they're implementing the tax and quotas in their country. This has, as a result of this, leads the ICES and their scientific advice for stocks for 2026. They call for a reduction. The ministers outlined it: 70% mackerel, 41% in blue whiting and 20% in boar. This has the potential to cost Ireland 130 to 150 million in areas off the coast and in rural areas where there's no alternative source of employment. Our catching sector is facing the biggest cut to their fishing opportunities in the history. In real terms, that's proposed in the 2006 recommendations, and equivalent to the cumulative impact of 4 years Brexit transfers. And I can state very clearly, and I mean this genuinely, that the fishing industry was thrown onto the bus to secure the Brexit. Had we at that time threatened to veto Brexit, then we wouldn't have a problem today. We would have had a problem with European, but we certainly would have had the mackerel that we've given away to secure Brexit. The processing sector will be severely impacted, and there are numerous jobs that will be lost in, as I said, rural areas where there's no alternative sources of employment. The processing sector could contract in the next 12 months by 180 to 200 million. The scale of the job losses and impacts is unprecedented and catastrophic in scale. 2,200 to 2,400, and I believe that has been realistic, could be gone in jobs inside the next 6 months. I think that the department and you, Minister, and your colleagues in government, you must firm up. We must take Europe on. I do believe that you won't succeed unless that you go out into the various member states. And it's not just enough to negotiate with the maritime states. I'm suggesting to you, Minister, and I do not believe that you or Minister Hayden will have the time to visit each capital, but I would suggest to you that you call in the ambassadors in all of these countries, not just in the coastal states, but in all of the others in Eastern Europe, because they will have an input. And I know from experience over the years, they will go along with the Commission's recommendations. But if you or the ambassadors meet their counterparts and meet those responsible and highlight for them the implications for us and request them not to vote in favour, they'll go for a qualified majority, of course, but not to vote, and make it very clear to them. And I would hope that the Minister for Foreign Affairs, who told me he was quite interested in resolving this, and so is the Taoiseach, call in the ambassadors and get them to go to the various capitals if you people. But I would say to you that you should go to the maritime state capitals and the commissioners do the others. I believe that the department, and no disrespect, I was ahead of that for years when I had, but I believe we're all out of our depth, and it's my fear, and that is the fear of, not me, but the fear of the industry. While I accept your bona fides and commitment, Minister, I'm not fully convinced that all of your team are on top of this crisis. I believe that you and your team don't fully appreciate the detrimental effects of the proposed reductions. And I'm convinced that have we the capacity to deal with the challenges ahead? Then this needs to be dealt with by an all-government approach, and I have made a recommendation to you. Europe has been weak at coastal states, the very same Norway that are chief architects of the destruction of the mackerel stock will be attempting again to gain access to the west of Ireland over the next number of weeks. I'm pleased that you have taken a very strong view and that you have instructed your officials to oppose the entry of Europe into the west of Ireland this year. And I'm grateful to you for that, and I hope that you will follow through on that. I strongly united no from Ireland and the EU to Norway to stop supporting the industry and, moreover, the recovery of these shared stocks such as blue whiting and mackerel. We must also ensure that you can convince Europe and that the market access and trade restrictions for fish products to be fully applied against Norway. And that can be done against Norway, against Faroe and against Iceland. And that can be done under Article 1016 of 2012. And that needs to be fully implemented because Norway need the European Union market to sell their products. We could lose up to 40 to 50% of the value of our national quotas in monetary terms inside the next 3 months. Let that sink in. It's very serious for the country and particularly for the coastal counties, whether it's Donegal, Galway, Mayo, right down to Cork and Kerry and across to Waterford and up. Because it's not just these. If you look at the proposals from ISIS, it's just not mackerel, blue whiting and boarfish. There are other species of demersal fish that are also affected. I believe also, and I would hope it wouldn't have to happen, but I think if it has to happen, the government needs to immediately draw up a financial framework and a support package to cover the affected sectors from catching to processing. This needs to be done. If we're serious about this, then this needs to be done over the next 4 weeks. It's not good enough to say that the budget is over now and we have to look ahead. Then this is unprecedented, and I think this financial framework should be drawn up. The government needs to address the weaknesses of our department. It's been too long, I believe, too weak and out of touch with the fishing sectors and communities. It's just to allow it to meander as it did before. We're weak within Europe and our presence needs to be strengthened there. And I believe that the PERM rep have to strengthen their representation there to look after our interests, because the big date is the council meeting. But it's done and dusted at that stage. A lot of the work has been done. It's over the next number of weeks that we want to ensure that the officials get the additional support they need to prepare for that important meeting. The government needs to address the over-regulation of the fishing and processing. We at times say, oh, we're so proud because we're implementing European legislation and European rules and regulations. I believe that that's killing the industry. And I know full well that the SFPA, they've driven away foreign landings from this country. And they're not landing, and they could be landing here, but they've driven them away. Factory ships that work the waters around the country, they're unregulated with absolutely no oversight. No one knows what they are at out there. And we don't have the capacity now within the Defence Forces to try and ensure that we stop that overfishing. The 2006 Sea Fisheries and Maritime Jurisdiction Act needs to be redrafted from scratch. I remember on the other side of the House, and it's the first time in the history of the state that a statutory instrument was rescinded in all those years. And I was the one who pioneered that, because fishermen were getting penalty points, and if they went to court afterwards, the court might have overturned, but the penalty points still existed. So you're driving down the road, down the M1, you get penalty points, you go to the court, then the penalty points are scratched, whereas here they're not. And no sooner was I out of this house in 2020 when the penalty points were reintroduced at that time. And I got the support, and I was told by people on this side of the House that time, I didn't even have the support of my own party. I had the support. I had the support of Sinn Féin, I had the support of Labour, I had the support of the Independents, I had all of them. And as soon as I was gone, it was changed like that. And of course, I think that was wrong to have done that. And I didn't even get a telephone call to say, this was your rescinding of the penalty points. But I mean, that's for another day that I'll deal with going forward. In the pelagic sector, we need as a national policy of government to reintroduce in-factory weighing. And I can't take credit that I went to Joe Borg, the Commissioner, when our pelagic fish were being weighed in the pier, going out into ambient temperature, affecting the quality of the fish. And I brought him over to Killybegs, and he saw the futility of that and introduced weighing in factories. And the factories are full of cameras, that you don't have to leave the office in Killybegs or in Castletownbere or whatever. You can see exactly what's going on. I mean, this is futile, and the quality of the fish are being affected. That's something that has been looked at. And there's an attitude that all of those in the fishing industry are criminals. I can state very clearly, having spent a lifetime, that they're good, honest, decent people who get very little support and create jobs in areas where there's no alternative source of employment. I do believe that in the pelagic sector we need to, as a national policy of government, to reintroduce that in-house weighing. But that's for another day. But if it's going the way it's going, there might be much need to weigh. There could be so little as a result of the cuts. Year in, year out, we witness how they affect our blue whiting processes for human consumption, a fishery that we in this country pioneered. It was Ireland who pioneered. And I also can take some credit in 1972, I remember very well, when mackerel were going out the road to fish meal. And at that time, I sent samples to a number of factories in Europe, opened up the markets there. And they are still continuing to this very day. So I can take some credit, and I fully understand it. And coming from a rural constituency, I realise the importance of fishing. So, Minister, if we fail to get our house in order and we face into the greatest fishing and processing crisis in our history, we will pay the greatest price due to our own incompetence. I would strongly recommend to you, Minister, that you take up my suggestion and that you call in, or the Minister of Foreign Affairs or whoever, and instruct the ambassadors to go to the various governments and make it very clear to them the implications of this. I believe this demands immediate action, a completely new direction, a new leadership, and I would wish you well in your endeavours. It's a difficult time. It's a lonely place to be. I've been there many years. It's a lonely place when you're in there, but if you can secure the support of some of the maritime states, European states, but particularly those states who have no interest in fish, none whatsoever, and convince them that you're being done down, and I do believe that you'll get support from them.
Thank you, Deputy. I now call on Deputy Porrick McLaughlin.
Can Corler. Minister, there's a story there up on the Skipper and online, and it's the BIM annual fisheries report, and it's caused outrage in the fishing industry because essentially the report says it's all fine. It's good. It's all fine. 2023 data, and this has to stop. This has to stop. But we have to stop denying what's happening. My party conducted a survey late last year. Hundreds and hundreds of fishermen and families, but it wasn't just responding to the survey. They could make some commentary, and what was in that report, and I've emailed it to yourselves. It's absolutely harrowing. It's heartbreaking. People talking about, we have fished for generations. This is a tradition and a heritage, and it's ending with me. I met fishermen, face to face, who were in tears because they're single-handed fishing. Their families, there's no future for them. And I'm going to get into now the unprecedented crisis that we face, the economic Armageddon, to quote Brendan Byrne of the IFPEA. We need to wake up. We have to wake up once and for all. The Chinese, and you're going to China now next week, the Chinese tell us that a crisis is also an opportunity. This is an opportunity now for a reset of our whole mentality in Ireland, in our government, in our Department of the Marine, in Bord Iascaigh, in every agency, SFPA, every single agency interacting with our fishing communities. There has to be a whole change. It's outrageous that BIM let that report go to print at a time like this. Outrageous, offensive, unacceptable. In terms of mackerel is a precious resource to our fishing communities. It was an industry that the ingenuity, the ambition of our people built up. We built it up. It was a world-class industry that we built up here. Thousands of jobs created on the back of it. And it's a shared resource. It's a migratory species. It spawns off our west coast. It works its way up the Atlantic. A shared resource. Because we're in the common fisheries policy, our fishermen must follow the science. They must follow the advice from ISIS every year, and quotas are allocated on that basis. And that's right. Our fishing should be based on science. It should be sustainable and it should be responsible. Absolutely agree with that. The problem is that there are rule breakers, there are rogues out there who have been utterly reckless and utterly selfish, and they've paid no price whatsoever. And I'm sad to say, it's a country I admire, Norway. Another country I admire, Iceland, Faroe Islands. Supported and complicit in this, Russian Federation, the United Kingdom. Complicit in this practice. And they are rewarded. Rewarded. UK have had their trade and cooperation agreement extended for 12 years. No price to pay for this. And I asked the question when I learned about the absolutely devastating impact of these cuts that are clearly coming because they're based on science. Who benefits from this within the European Union? There are major corporations, fishing corporations, based in the European Union who invested heavily in the fleets in Iceland and Faroes. Heavily. They have been actively involved in this strategic overfishing. They are based in the European Union. And I believe that they have a huge influence in the European Commission. And I believe that Ireland has yet again been shafted, utterly shafted, by those at the top of the European Commission. They did it to us in Brexit. They did it to us in Brexit. There was no burden sharing. There was some financial resources, just some. But that was allowed to happen. And here we are again. This has been warned for years. I mean, we've been hearing about this for years. Our producer organisations have been talking about what is coming down the line. Last year, we had a very significant cut in mackerel. This year, what's being suggested is devastating. But it's not just mackerel, as you know. It's blue whiting, it's boarfish. This has a knock-on impact on the inshore sector because they need blue whiting, mackerel for bait. So their prices are going to go through the roof here. Now, remember that the inshore sector are dealing with prices that they had 30 years ago in terms of the price for their fish, but their costs have increased tenfold. So it's not just the offshore sector, to be clear, that are impacted by this, it's also the inshore sector. So what are we talking about here in terms of the impact? I've spoken to the Irish Fish Processors and Exporters Association, and they've provided me with their impact assessment. And when you go through, mackerel is just so important to the producer sector, to the factories. It's a huge part of their profits. And when you look through 7 examples that I've been provided, mackerel, it's absolutely devastating the impact. We're going to lose hundreds of jobs here. Hundreds of jobs, no doubt about it. It's estimated that the impact in terms of losses, because it's not just pelagic, as we know, it's whitefish, it's nephrop, it's in various seas. We're talking potentially 200 million loss next year. That's the estimated loss. It is really unprecedented in scale. And I'm going to say again, absolutely scandalous that BIM published the report they published today at a time that we're dealing with this. In terms of the organisations that are dealing with this, so I have here submissions from the IFPO and the KFO. Obviously, those two are particularly impacted by the pelagic cuts. And, you know, I'm just reading here, under the model quota scenarios, up to 837 direct jobs in the pelagic sector could be affected. 837 direct jobs, not talking about indirect, in some manner in the catching sector. So that's the threat. Including indirect and induced effects, the potential total impact is up to 2,361 jobs across the wider seafood economy. That's what we're talking about here. And then if we look at the supports that are needed, we clearly need to see the Hague preferences. I mean, that, you know, that has to happen this time. Burden sharing did not get delivered to our people. We were left carrying the weight of Brexit. The Hague preferences are absolutely essential. They'll reduce some of the blow. Now to turn to BIM. It's time for BIM to step up. They've offended the industry unbelievably with this report issued. But they can heal those wounds by doing a strong impact assessment, working directly with the industry on the real figures, the real data now, in the here and now. They need to do an impact assessment, looking at all the scenarios, short, medium and long term, in terms of what supports are needed. We are going to need financial supports. And Minister, I'm glad you said it. When you talk to any fisherman, they say, we want to fish. We want fish. Listen, that's what I want. But right now we have to deal with the reality. Of course we need to bring in the Hague preferences. Of course we need to see a review of the common fisheries policy. Of course we need justice. Of course the huge factory ships that are hoovering up the fish, the industrialisation of fishing has to end. Absolutely, all of those things. But right now, in the here and now, we're going to need financial supports to save our industry and save as many jobs as possible. So emergency short-term financial support. In terms of the quota management and licensing, reform of the common fisheries policy, all of that has to be looked at. So the approach, Minister, and I would defer to my colleague, Deputy Pat the Cope Gallagher, Minister, huge experience, and I agree with everything he said in terms of we need to talk to everybody here. Right? We need to tell our story. They need to understand, our fellow member states, the injustice that the Irish people have suffered under the common fisheries policy. The fact that those rogue players, and I'm sorry to say it, right, in this case they have been rogue players in overfishing mackerel. Norway, Iceland, Faroe Islands, Russian Federation, whatever you want to, because there's huge sanctions in place against them anyway, but also the UK. They need to accept that this is utterly wrong. They need to stop the overfishing, and there needs to be a real approach from Europe in terms of justice for our people. We're a small country, you know, and we deserve that support right now. So, Minister, I trust that you will engage strongly in that. We need to have a very strong representation in Europe. So this situation of the permanent representation in terms of the Department of Marine, we have to up our game. I proposed a Fish Ireland office, you know, where the industry, our department, we're hand in hand, permanently based in Europe, promoting our seafood industry. That needs to be looked at right now in terms of how we turn this around, turn the crisis into an opportunity, and that needs to happen now. I also want to talk about the issue of the third country vessels from Norway, Iceland. It's very clear to me that if they refuse to act responsibly, to do what's right collectively for all of us with the mackerel resource, they should not be allowed to fish blue whiting in our waters. It's just utterly offensive. Any country that has not been responsible, not been behaving right, shouldn't be rewarded. So that clearly needs to be dealt with. There needs to be proper control in terms of those vessels. In my remaining minutes, I want to talk about the inshore sector and the islands sectors, because they can't be forgotten about. The inshore sector are looking for financial supports for their fishermen. And we're talking here, if we look at the farmers, they have always had, and rightly so, financial supports under the Common Agricultural Policy because they couldn't live on what they earned from the produce. Similarly, recently you have basic income supports for the artistic community. Welcome that too. We need to see proper financial supports for inshore fishermen. I told you earlier, they're fishing single-handedly. They're putting themselves in real danger, so they need supports. In terms of islands, we need to look at Article 17 of the Common Fisheries Policy. We need fairness for our islands communities, fairness for our inshore communities as part of this overall process, and I'll continue with that another day.
Deputy Johnny Moyle.
Minister, the Irish fishing industry is in a state of flux and is on course for a full-scale collapse. The proposed 2026 quotas are accepted and implemented. These crippling quotas represent a 70% cut in mackerel, 41% cut in blue whiting and 22% cut in boarfish. These cuts will literally financially sink every fishing boat in Ireland. While on the other side, we have non-EU fleets, the likes of Russia, Faroe Islands, Iceland and Norway, continuously overfishing. And not only that, but being rewarded for it through the unilateral setting of quotas. For example, in 1 week, the Norwegian fleet caught 40,000 tonnes of mackerel, equivalent to the entire quota allowed for the Irish fleet. This begs the question, who exactly are the European-based fishing corporations who make millions and benefit from reciprocal access to the fish in Norwegian waters? Maybe the Minister will use his office to investigate these corporations and publish the findings. Minister, we know this is a very difficult situation and by no means an easy task. Minister, the fishers of Ireland are sending out a clarion cry for you to call on the Commissioner to evoke Article 1026, where the Commissioner has the power to legally address and respond to unfair competition through trade and market restrictions. The irony of this is that the Irish fleet have followed the science, played by the books, that these countries outside the EU are rewarded while our fishing industry is facing a financial ruin. We in Sinn Féin, through our spokespersons on fisheries, Padraig McLaughlin and the Chair of the Fisheries Committee, Conor McGuinness, are asking the Minister to create an emergency financial rescue package for the next couple of years. We believe the Minister has a vital role to play in supporting the Irish fisheries in this. We would ask the Minister to work towards establishing a standalone Fish Ireland office in Brussels, to consider real-time closures, to examine the Brexit Adjustment Reserve and unspent funds, and to vigorously negotiate the quota allocations. My county of Wexford is a seafaring county, with fishing villages totally depending on the industry, from Rosslare, Kilmore, Duncannon, Slade, Ballyhack. These are villages that need your support and need your help. I would appeal to the Minister again to negotiate new fishing quotas and to use the European Maritime Fisheries Aquaculture Fund to support our fishing industry and our coastal communities.
Deputy Conor D. McGuinness.
Ireland is an island nation with a proud maritime tradition, and our coastal communities, our fishing harbours and our seafaring people have long sustained the life of this country in hard times and in good. Yet for too long the fishing and seafood industry has been treated as an afterthought, a bargaining chip in European negotiations and a casualty of short-termism at home. Across every coastal county, from Louth to Donegal down to Waterford and Cork, fishermen and processors now face the perfect storm. Quota cuts, rising costs, loss of traditional fishing grounds and the continued overfishing by external states. The result is a crisis, or more accurately, an emergency. Earlier this year, Deputy McLaughlin and I published a survey of Irish fishermen. Its findings were stark. 98% do not believe the government is protecting the industry. 98% don't believe that this government has their back. 91% believe that without a radical change in direction, it will not survive the next 3 to 5 years. And while this debate is welcome, and I commend Deputy McLaughlin for seeking it, it is long overdue. The collapse in mackerel stocks has simply exposed a decline that was already well underway. And we need now to move beyond tea and sympathy and towards a national strategy that is ambitious, assertive and unapologetic in its defence of Ireland's national interests. Tá Arnall éascrocht na hÉireann in Éirchéim, tá éascrí agus pobl chósta faoi bhrú de bhór leideithe ar chótaí, costais orda agus ró éascrocht ag tíre eile an Éirua an Iaslan agus na Hiláin Féro san Óireamh. Éilíonn Sinn Féin strátéis náisiúnta láidir a chus nóig ar nachfaní a neartóigh Calafort agus a thabharg takeíocht cheart díoscrí chladí. Caig éire seasamh suas son a gcuid bobbal chósta agus a lasannéantas Eorpach. For decades, successive Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael governments have gone to Brussels to manage, not to lead, to accommodate, not to assert. And the results of that failure speak for themselves. Ireland controls 12% of EU waters, yet receives less than 6% of total EU quotas. Since Brexit, that imbalance has worsened, with about 40% of quota value transferred from Britain coming from stocks historically caught by Irish vessels. And the Brexit deal was catastrophic. And the decision earlier this year to extend it to 2038 did bring certainty, but certainty of collapse, certainty of catastrophe. So we need a fundamental reset, a radical new approach that recognises the strategic, economic and cultural importance of fisheries to our coastal regions. And that means pressing the European Commission and Council for an urgent review of quota allocations, building the Department's capacity to fight our corner, including through that office that Deputy McLaughlin mentioned in Brussels, and reforming the Department of the Marine. And indeed BIM. And wouldn't it be great, Minister, if we had somebody who has a background in the fishing industry appointed as the new Chief Executive of Bord Iascaigh. And I would ask you to reflect on that and to consider that as you look towards that appointment and appointing a Chief Executive. We now have an Oireachtas Committee on Fisheries and Maritime Affairs, and as Chair, I want that committee to be active and assertive, giving voice to coastal communities, holding government to account, proposing policy innovations where appropriate and demanding delivery for the Irish fishing industry. Our inshore fisheries have been mentioned here, and they are the beating heart of coastal Ireland, of our coastal communities. Small family-owned vessels that sustain employment and tradition in areas with few alternatives, yet they're too often forgotten about. And when they are in the forefront of minds of the state, it often seems it's with a view to criminalising them or penalising them for simply carrying out their work. With almost 2,000 vessels, the inshore fleet provides over half of all seafood employment, but receives only a fraction of supports and quota access. Most are confined to shellfish, crab, lobster and shrimp, and young people face major barriers, limited licences, tiny quotas and high costs. The next generation is being driven out. They do not want to take over the boats and they don't want to enter the industry. We need fairer allocation of our national quota to support small-scale sustainable fisheries. We need targeted investment in coastal infrastructure and processing capacity, and we need proper implementation of the Irish inshore fisheries sector strategy, backed by real funding and continuity grants to keep small operators afloat. So if we value our coastal communities, we must value our fishermen and our inshore sector, not as the afterthought, but as the cornerstone of our rural and regional economy. Harbour infrastructure, a topic you and I have discussed at length, Minister, is the backbone of our fishing economy. Yet across the country, and in Waterford in particular, it's crying out for investment. In Cay Helvick, dredging has been identified as a dire need by local fishermen, by the local authority, and indeed by those who volunteer to save lives at sea. But progress is stalled for want of state funding. The local authority harbours programme is dysfunctional. I don't think it's fit for purpose. It's inadequate. I said this yesterday at a committee meeting, and I'll continue saying it. It will not fund the engineering or environmental studies needed to reach a shovel-ready stage, and that is its intrinsic failure. That must change, Minister. Cay Helvick and other local authority harbours are vital infrastructure, and yet they belong to the local authority. We accept that, we acknowledge it. But that does not give the government, and it does not give the department, in my opinion, or you as Minister for Fisheries, the ability to say that it's not part of the responsibility of the state. In Dunmore East, one of the state's 6 designated fishery harbour centres and the most important fishing port in the southeast, serving the east coast, serving the north and serving the south, critical safety works remain unfunded. Fishermen have raised real concerns about berthing safety, key conditions and overcrowding in the harbour. Promised capital works have yet to materialise, and we need to see immediate approval and funding for Dunmore East capital programme. That will include dredging, key realignment and safety upgrades. And it's not just a Waterford issue, as I said. This is about protecting lives, jobs and the long-term viability of one of Ireland's major fisheries ports. Ireland's offshore fleet in ports like Dunmore East, Castletown, Bear and Howth are central to our seafood economy, supporting hundreds of jobs in fishing, processing, engineering and exports. Yet our fleets are allowed to catch less fish in our own waters than ever before. Under Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, Ireland has been a soft touch in quota talks. Time and time again, our share has been traded away in favour of stronger member states who negotiate harder in their own country's interests. And that must end, Minister. We must demand fair and equitable access to fish stocks in Irish waters. We need to rebuild pelagic and demersal fleets. We need to secure a fair quota of prawns in the Irish Sea. We need to ensure access to finance for vessel modernisation and keep value-added processing here in Ireland. The common fisheries policy has failed our coastal communities. It rewards those who overfish and punishes those who act responsibly. Sinn Féin will press for reform that puts sustainability, fairness and Ireland's national interest at its core. Nowhere is that failure more clearer in the here and now than in the mackerel and wider pelagic fishery. Scientific advice for 2026 recommends a 70% cut to EU mackerel quota and a 41% cut to blue whiting, and not to forget boarfish. These drastic reductions are not caused by Irish mismanagement, as has been said by my colleagues. It's by rampant overfishing by third countries, particularly Norway, Iceland and the Faroe Islands, who of course are under Danish sovereignty and therefore I would have thought part of the European Union, and often aided by EU-based companies using those flags. And that's not to let the Russian Federation and Britain off the hook either for their gross overfishing in the North Atlantic. The European Commission has known about this for years. We've been raising it, others have been raising it, the industry and environmental groups. More than 1 million tonnes of mackerel have been caught above scientific advice in the last 5 years. And instead of sanctioning offenders, the EU has rewarded them with access to Western waters, or certainly proposing to do so. And this has plunged Ireland's pelagic sector into crisis. For Donegal in particular, but right across the coast and our entire seafood economy, we're looking at losses that could exceed 200 million next year. We need an emergency survival fund, and we need it now. And as has been noted here by yourself, Minister, and by my colleague, Deputy McLaughlin, fishermen don't want handouts, they don't want a bailout, but they need it in the here and now. They need it as this crisis will affect them. And the EU must act decisively to end this reckless overfishing, and the Irish Government must demand sanctions. It must show leadership and it must demand compensation as well. It's indefensible that Irish fishermen who follow the rules face ruin while others profit with the consent of their governments and the silence and acquiescence, if we're being honest, of Brussels. The mackerel issue is a test of whether Ireland has any real influence in Europe, and we cannot afford another year of hand-wringing. So in just a few weeks, as you know, Minister, you'll be in Brussels with the Council of Ministers to set the 2026 quotas. And expectations in the industry, I can't say that they're high or buoyant at the moment because of the crisis, but there is a weight of expectation on your shoulders as you go there because of the great urgency. Minister, you must go to Brussels with a clear mandate to fight, not simply manage, but to fight for Ireland's corner. But it can't be on your shoulders alone, Minister. It has to be on the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach as well. Taoiseach is head of government and Taoiseach in his role as Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade. And a failure to deliver on the reasonable demands of the Irish fishing industry would be a collective failure for this government, a collective failure to assert Ireland's sovereignty in Europe. For decades, fishermen have believed rightly that Irish fisheries were sacrificed to secure wins elsewhere, and that must stop. The balance has to be reset. We need you, Minister, to secure a fair share of quota allocations reflecting the scale of our waters, concrete EU actions to sanction overfishing by third countries, and indeed by those European corporations who effectively operate in vessels under the flag of third countries. We need to see funding for harbour infrastructure and fleet modernisation, and we need to see a renewed commitment to Ireland's coastal communities. Our fishing industry is not asking for favours, it's simply demanding fairness. And fishing communities, they've endured decades of neglect and now they need delivery, Minister. So Ireland's fishing heritage, our economic potential, thousands of livelihoods, hundreds of millions of euros of economic growth are at stake here. So the time for caution has passed, Minister. The time for niceties has passed. What we need and what Sinn Féin will continue to demand is action, action that is firm, coordinated and in the national interest. Cormail Magat.
Thank you.
Ministers, I welcome Minister Dooley's announcement of the 27.75 million in capital projects for Ireland's publicly owned harbours under the 2025 Fisheries, Harbour, Centres and Coastal Infrastructure Development Programme. This funding, of course, while welcome news for coastal communities, but to be honest, the way this funding is being divided is far from equitable. Touch on a point Deputy McGuinness just after mentioning, let's talk about harbours. This year, 19.5 million, the lion's share is going to just 6 department-run fishery harbour centres, while a mere 4.3 million is being allocated to the local marine infrastructure scheme, which must stretch to cover every other small harbour and pier in the state. Let's put that in context. In Donegal, the Killybegs Fishery Harbour Centre received over 11.2 million, while Donegal County Council, which is responsible for 115 piers and harbours, received just 450,000 towards projects costing an estimated €660,000. That's not an equal partnership, Minister. That's a drop in the ocean for our coastal communities who are struggling to maintain essential infrastructure that sustains their local fishing and tourism industries. And to make matters worse, the 6 fishery harbour centres receive 100% of their project costs from the department, while the local authorities receive only 75%, leaving the remaining 25% to be found from already overstretched local budgets, or ultimately from local ratepayers. This is unfair, and they should be receiving the 100% funding. The result is that the smaller harbours, where most of our inshore fishers actually operate, are being left behind. And these are the fishers who use the most environmentally sustainable and friendly methods of fishing. They're the backbone of our inshore fishing sector. They deserve modern, safe, well-maintained facilities just as much as any national harbour. Fishermen in Donegal, in the Donegal constituency, have been in touch with Labour Party representatives there, including representatives from 2 local fishing co-ops, telling us that they feel the department is spending the lion's share of harbour funding on itself, promoting projects that local fishers neither want nor need, simply because the department has to use up its budget or risk losing it next year. That's not strategic investment, that's box ticking. We need a fairer, more balanced approach, one that recognises the local authority piers and harbours are an intrinsic part of our national coastal infrastructure. Ireland's network of piers, slipways and harbours supports not just fisheries, but marine tourism, recreation and local enterprise. Tourism and recreation in coastal areas is now the largest contributors to employment among Ireland's marine industries. Marine tourism alone represents 10% of our overall tourism sector, with over 260 enterprises involved in marine leisure, from angling to diving, kayaking, surfing and visiting our offshore islands. The Wild Atlantic Way has shown that what can be achieved when we invest in our coastal infrastructure and we build a world-class destination brand. But this success can't continue if local marine infrastructure is left to crumble. Fáilte Ireland continues to highlight the opportunities in coastal marine tourism, ecotourism and sustainable growth. But these opportunities can only be realised if the piers and harbours are up to standard. In my own constituency of Dublin Fingal West, Skerries and Balbriggan are both under the management of Fingal County Council. There's been consistent calls for capital works, including dredging, breakwater repairs, enhanced facilities for both fishing and leisure sectors. Notably, Balbriggan Harbour forms a central element of the Balbriggan Rejuvenation Plan, which seeks to revitalise the town and its coastal infrastructure. The smaller harbours in Rush and Lough Shinny continue to play an important role in supporting local fishermen and recreation users. However, these facilities also require upgrading, particularly in relation to safety measures, lighting, slipways and pontoons. Overall, there is a clear and ongoing need to invest in Fingal's harbour infrastructure to improve safety and accessibility for all users, strengthen support for coastal tourism and local fishing activities, enhance resilience to climate impacts and coastal erosion, ensure compliance with modern environmental and waste management standards. Fingal's harbours are critical coastal assets, supporting both local economies and community life. However, they now require targeted investment and modernisation. So, Minister, I'm calling for a fairer division of the funding, a 50-50 split between the fishery harbour centres and local authority marine infrastructure until a proper national assessment of needs is completed. A full 100% funding for the marine infrastructure projects, recognising their national importance. A national framework that ensures every harbour, large or small, is safe, modern and fit for purpose. We need also to address climate change, as it's having a profound effect on Ireland's harbours and coastal infrastructure. Rising sea levels, intensified storms, more frequent flooding events are already damaging vital port facilities and coastal defences. All over Ireland, harbours are experiencing increased erosion, structural damages to quays and slipways, siltation that hampers navigation and marine operations. These challenges threaten not only our maritime heritage, but also critical sectors such as fishing, aquaculture, tourism, trade, industries that sustain coastal communities and contribute significantly to the national economy. Local authorities and harbour boards are facing costs for repairs, maintenance, emergency works following extreme weather events. To safeguard all these assets, we must prioritise investment in climate-resilient infrastructure and adaptive coastal management. This includes strengthening breakwaters, modernising drainage and flood protection systems, and integrating climate change risk assessments into all harbour future development plans. Furthermore, we must trust our policies are adequately resourced and implement at local level to ensure that a consistent science-based approach is undertaken. By taking decisive action now, we can protect our harbours not only as centres of economic activity, but as lifelines for our coastal communities, ensuring they remain safe, functional and sustainable for generations to come. This is about fairness, Minister. It's about recognising that vibrancy and sustainability of our coastal communities depends on investment in the infrastructure that they use every day, not just the 6 harbours that are managed by the Department. Let's ensure that the smaller harbours, the beating hearts of so many coastal towns and villages, finally get their fair share. However, this will be completely useless if our fisheries sector is wiped out. The issue of overfishing and the management of our shared maritime resources has been ongoing for years and already spoken to by previous speakers. Yet despite years of engagement and submissions, the fishing sector now faces an unprecedented crisis. If we account for the cumulative cutbacks, Ireland's seafood industry could face losses of up to 200 million next year. And a conservative estimate suggests 2,000 jobs could be at risk. The impact on coastal and fishing communities would be devastating. I would like to thank the Irish South and East Fish Producers Organisation that got in touch with my office yesterday regarding the seriousness of this situation. The latest scientific advice for 2026 paints a deeply worrying picture. Drastic reductions are being recommended: 70% in mackerel, 41% in whiting, 22% in boarfish, and 0 catches for cod, haddock and whiting. If these cuts are implemented, the implications are severe. The economic viability of the Irish catching sector would be in jeopardy. Fish producers would be starved of raw materials, particularly in the pelagic sector, where closures could occur. And the service industries that depend on fishing will be hit, affecting the livelihoods right across our coastal communities. To put this in perspective, a loss of income from these cuts could exceed 60 million compared to 2024. Around 200 fishermen's jobs would be directly at risk. When we add the quota transfers to the UK from Brexit, Ireland's mackerel quota will have fallen by 85% since 2022. Mackerel alone was valued at 82 million in 2024, our most valuable fish stock for both catching and processing. To manage this crisis, the sector will urgently need cash resources to reduce pressure on quotas and share limited fishing opportunities fairly throughout the year. But unlike the Brexit schemes, these supports must be linked to the processing sector to avoid repeating past mistakes that left processors stranded without supply. The processing industry employs 3,800 people across 91 companies, has already been struggling since Brexit, and further cuts in 2026 could force closures. Minister, this isn't sustainable economically, socially, politically. The EU's management of these resources must respect scientific limits, yes, but also fairness. Ireland has consistently been on the losing side of these negotiations, and Ireland cannot continue to lose. The term economic Armageddon was used in the Fisheries Committee only last week, and this is not an exaggeration, it's reality for our fishing sector. Minister, I'm calling for a comprehensive support framework for the catching and processing sectors to be designed and delivered. Ireland's fishing and seafood industries are the lifeblood of many of our coastal communities, We must ensure their survival and their sustainability. And to finish, I'd like to highlight the work of my colleague and party leader, Deputy Ivana Bakic, on the Dublin Bay Bill. This legislation would go a long way to protecting biodiversity, enhancing water quality and restoring and regenerating amenities along our coastline. Thank you, Minister.
As a first-time TD, many people across so many different sectors and meeting those people, particularly volunteers of various groups and organisations, and learning from these very people is possibly one of the best parts of this job. In August of this year, Fisheries, the importance of fish, wildlife and our rivers, landed on my desk. And to be totally honest with everyone in this House, I knew very little about fish, wildlife and our rivers, despite living and being from Mallow, which the River Blackwater flows through. The Blackwater River was the scene of the greatest fish kill ever seen in this country. In excess of 40,000 fish were killed, coming from a chemical irritant. The cross-party agency group came to a conclusion that no definite source could be found. Minister, as you well know, and I want to put it on the record again, I want to thank you for coming to Mallow, and the people of Mallow did appreciate that. But you know that this caused significant hurt and anger in my hometown, along with its environs, and to get this conclusion is a cause of significant and serious concern. Following the joint Oireachtas Committee on the Environment, I'm shocked to hear the IFI chairperson and the workers themselves believe that they don't have strong enough enforcement powers within their organisation to stop companies, individuals or state agencies polluting our rivers. My understanding is that you and your department and the IFI have begun conversations to give them further enforcement powers. But my firm belief, Minister, is that must be sped up, or more events like what we saw on the Blackwater in August will continue to happen across this country. The essential issue, Minister, that members of our communities have, and they've directed it at me even though I'm not even in government, but that there's serious lack of accountability when it comes to protecting our environment and pollution in our environment. If we are serious about protecting our environment, protecting our rivers, protecting our fish, our wildlife, enforcement powers must be increased. EPA licences must be taken if constant pollution happens, because I can think of a number of organisations, private and public, that have polluted rivers in and around my hometown of Mallow for many years, are making millions and millions and millions of euro in profit, and they continue to pollute. And the reason for that, Minister, my firm belief is it will cost them far less to take the slap on the wrist and the few €1,000 worth of fine to put in the infrastructure. I want to thank you again for visiting Mallow that time. You are well aware of those fishermen that you met that day, that significant hurt and anger is being felt. And it continues to be felt. And no matter if I'm in opposition or if I'm in government, the lack of accountability is one that remains with the people in Mallow. So I'm asking you to speed up those conversations that have begun with the IFI to give them that enforcement powers. Because unless we give them those enforcement powers, things like what happened on the Blackwater will continue to happen on our waterways across this country. Gormagat.
Gormagat, the Count Carla, I very much welcome the opportunity to participate in this debate. Firstly, I want to welcome John Lynch from Howth, who is the CEO of the Irish South and East Fish Producers Organisation this afternoon, and I want to thank him for the very hard work that he does in this whole area. Count Carla, Ireland has a very proud fishing tradition right across our island, and I was glad to see that a standalone Minister for State for Fisheries was re-established as part of the programme for government, reflecting the government's commitment to this sector. It is important that as members of these houses we acknowledge that our fisheries are vital, not only for our economy but for our food security, and we must ensure that those working in this sector are supported to the absolute maximum. In my constituency of Dublin Bay North, we are very proud of Howth Harbour and Howth's tradition as a fishing village dating back to the Middle Ages. This is my second time raising this matter on the floor of the House. Last month I put forward a topical issue to discuss the urgent works required at the harbour. The harbour has not been dredged since the 1970s, half a century ago, and vessels are experiencing significant issues with the harbour's depth. A number of weeks ago, a vessel became stuck in the harbour for a number of hours at low tide. Vessels have a very narrow window to get in and out of the harbour, particularly larger boats with a clearance of 5 metres or less. Planning permission has been granted for a wonderful new park off the pier using the dredged material. However, a consent is being awaited from the Environmental Protection Agency. We urgently need this approval so that vessels can utilise the harbour with ease and so they can get in and out and do what they want and need to do. It is not just fishing vessels which use the harbour, but commercial and also leisure craft, but extremely importantly, RNLA rescue craft. This delay could have serious implications on lifeboats in the future in the event of an emergency. I urge the Department to do what it can to get this project moving as soon as possible. There are other improvements required at the harbour, such as the boat repair shed. Currently, it is only accessible for part of the year. Greater sheltering of the shed would allow vessel owners make repairs and improvements of the vessels all year round. I ask the Department to have a look at this and offer definitive support in this regard. Also at the harbour, the synchro lift, which was built in the 1980s, is long overdue an upgrade, and I also ask that the Department give this the attention that it deserves. Howth, as we all know, is a major centre for tourism and contributes not only to the local economy but to our national economy as well. Each year, hundreds travel to Howth to celebrate Ireland's maritime heritage and our seafood tradition at Howth Maritime and Seafood Festival. However, it's vital that the local fishermen and women and the harbour itself receive the support they need to sustain its rich fishing tradition. At a broader level, we are witnessing growing fragility in our food systems, from impacts of war, climate disasters to rising costs and supply shortages. Ireland cannot take its food security for granted. We must provide every support that we can to our fisheries and those within the sector to protect our livelihoods and our national food security. Those in our fishing sector have raised their real concern over the conditions they are facing into 2026, which Deputy Patrick Gallagher has so eruditely put. This entails reductions in catches of mackerel, blue whiting and boarfish, and zero catches for cod, haddock and whiting stocks. Such cuts would seriously impact the viability of our catching sector, prevent fish processing businesses with access to raw material, and impact the service industry that supports our seafood sector in coastal communities like Howth. The Irish South and East Fish Producers Organisation have put forward a number of measures to support the sector, including subsidies or tie-up schemes to reduce fishing effort where stocks require a period of rebuilding, and also calls for Ireland to invoke all its hake preferences where its quota is below the threshold. And I know, Minister, you're very familiar with those proposals. I welcome that Budget 2026 provides a significant £157.7 million to support the fisheries sector. This funding will provide much needed financial assistance and essential investment in infrastructure. I strongly urge the Department to continue to work with the sector to meet the significant challenges ahead and to ensure the long-term viability of our fisheries and coastal communities. The Department, however, needs to seriously up its game, as is so well been put by Deputy O'Gallagher. Gurmaga the Count Carla.
Has long called for this debate, and I'm glad to finally have the chance to stand up for coastal and fishing communities, and I thank our fisheries spokesman Padraig McLaughlin for pushing for this debate. These communities, fishing communities, have played a critical role in our economy and culture for generations, but now are facing an existential threat following proposed cuts to our fishing quota and the common fisheries policy. Just as we must protect marine life and biodiversity, we must also prioritise the communities that have lived alongside them for generations. Science and sustainability are not incompatible with thriving coastal communities. Both can exist harmoniously, but however, due to decades of EU inaction and diplomatic failure by governments, Ireland's fishing industry is facing a crisis. Devastating quota reductions combined with the loss of traditional fishing grounds represent serious threats. Quota cuts could wipe out over $200 million in value next year, with mackerel losses up to $80 million alone. To add to this, some of the most egregious damage has and continues to be caused by the rogue actions of other states through overfishing. Overfishing by states such as Norway, the Faroes, Russia, Iceland and Britain has had a devastating impact on Ireland's fishing stocks. Over 1 million tonnes of mackerel have been caught above scientific advice in the last 5 years, according to the North Atlantic Pelagic Advocacy Group. These are not just numbers, these are livelihoods, communities and a proud heritage under threat. But what has the European Commission done in response? Worse than nothing. Not only has it failed to impose sanctions, these same states have in fact been rewarded with greater access to water off the west of Ireland. In one recent deal, Norway was granted 200,000 tonnes of blue whiting in Irish waters, while Ireland received less than 60,000 tonnes. So that's worth €50 million to Norway versus 15 to Ireland. This is unjust and it's outrageous. And it's not like the EU is unaware of the devastating consequences of their actions in response to such rogue state behaviour. They have admitted that continued overfishing could force a zero-catch mackerel quota by 2027, given the scale of these inflated quotas. This is a cliff edge that is simply not surmountable without decimating livelihoods and communities as things stand. We've also heard from fish producers over 2,000 jobs could be lost, and this will also affect the inshore fishers. Let me make this clear. Sinn Féin stands with fishing and coastal communities. We admire their resilience and commend their calls for fairness and accountability, and we're calling on the government to stand strongly with them. We need a firm stance in Brussels. It's high time that the EU does what is right, acting decisively, and where rogue behaviour exists, it must stand firm. The government must make it clear that if this continued overfishing continues, sanctions, trade leverage and access restrictions will be on the table. We also call for an urgent financial aid package to support the industry through the crisis. Sinn Féin has proposed a 10 million contingency fund and 10 million in capital for harbour improvements. Speaking to our local councillor in West Kerry, Robert Brosnan, he has also called for the tuna fish quota for inshore grants so that they can diversify, and more infrastructure for fishers in West Kerry. We believe that the government must back our coastal communities, not abandon them. The system also needs major reform, including a dedicated Minister for Fisheries and Marine, a Fish Ireland office in Brussels and a root and branch review of the department. BIM also needs to do an impact assessment in order to protect the industry and a long-term strategy to sustainably support the fishing industry. Our offshore, inshore and aquaculture sectors must be supported. We must ban destructive factory vessels, ensure fair quota distribution and promote sustainable growth. And when it comes to Ireland offshore energy ambition in particular, fishing and coastal communities must see the benefits. Community benefit funds should be expanded and ring-fenced for this purpose specifically. In addition, they should be treated as experts and partners that they have the potential to be, but many fishers are locked out. Under the government's current plan, in order for a fishing vessel to be used as a guard vessel, the fisherman must deregister the vessel, apply to go on the commercial register, and then, should they wish to fish again, reapply for both a load line certificate and to go back on the fishing register. This is bureaucracy that in practice stops the communities in the major economic and infrastructural developments in their area, and it is not a just transition. It's not like this in other EU countries. Will the Minister commit to breaking down the barriers for fishing vessels to act as guard vessels? And I want to take this opportunity to ask once again, where is the marine protected areas legislation? We've been waiting far too long. It threatens marine life and biodiversity, but also creates significant uncertainty for our coastal and fishing communities. They need to be seen as partners, co-producers and active authors of this process. It's the only way it will work.
Deputy. Deputy Jennifer Whitmore.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. Minister, I think it's clear at this stage that the common fisheries policy, as it is currently being implemented, is not fit for purpose. Something that was established 40 years ago to provide for a coordinated management of fish stocks has failed. It has failed to protect fish stocks, it has failed to protect our marine, and it has failed to protect Irish fishing industry. Our Irish fishing industry, it is an industry that really is core to who we are as an island country, core to our coastal communities and to our identity. And rather than being part of a process in Europe that protects that, what we've actually seen happen is that the sustainability of the fishery itself has been completely eroded by the systems that have been put in place, and fishermen have been squeezed further and further. Their quotas are being squeezed, and these fishermen are being squeezed out of their boats and out of their jobs, and indeed probably out of generations of history of working in that area. Unfortunately, the Common Fisheries Policy, as it is currently being managed as well, it is also putting our fish stocks at huge risk, huge risk. So this policy is not working for any element of the stakeholders that it was essentially set up to protect. Around 20 years ago, Minister, because this isn't something that's just happened recently. I know there's been updated information from ICES in relation to stocks of certain species, but this isn't something that's just happened recently. 20 years ago, when I was fishing out of Howth, I would have gone down with the Marine Institute to fish from Howth. I would have, we used to go up to particular boats and ask, could we go out with them for the week to catch some samples. I was working on a cod project at the time. And I would literally talk to fishermen and ask, and when they'd say to me, well, what are you trying to sample? I'd say cod and haddock. And they literally would laugh in my face, saying, you are not going to get any cod out here. That was probably 20 years ago. And we can see now that that has continued to play out. And when we're looking at the state of the stocks, of our whitefish stocks at the moment, we have a zero catch TSE for cod in the northwest, in the Irish Sea, in the Celtic Sea, for haddock in the Celtic Seas, whiting in the Celtic Seas, and pollock in the Celtic Seas. So that in itself is a clear illustration that the system that we're currently operating on is not working. We're seeing the collapse of stocks. And indeed, I think there's two particular stocks that, were large parts of the discussion today, and that's the mackerel stocks and the blue whiting stocks. I think it's important when we're talking about these stocks collapse that it isn't just, this isn't just a problem for Ireland, that the collapse of this stock is catastrophic. And again, this is because it has not been managed properly. But if you look at the mackerel, the ICES advice in relation to the mackerel stocks, it's saying that the total allowable catch must be no more than 174,000 tonnes. That's a 77% reduction compared to the estimated catch in 2025. But that advice, it's driven by the maximum sustainable yield, right? And essentially what that says is that there will be a 50% probability that the spawning stock biomass can recover to the absolute minimum biological limit by 2027. That's only a 50% chance that if we manage to keep to that 77% reduction, that there's still only a 50% chance that the stock is recoverable. I mean, that is just incredible. Decades of overfishing has caused this crisis. And since 2010, the collective quotas set by the coastal states, which include UK, EU, Norway and others, have resulted in actual catches that have exceeded the scientific advice by an average of 39% every year. So fish stocks don't work this way. If you overfish them, there isn't enough mature fish to reproduce to keep that stock going. That's the fundamental basis of it. And if we continue to allow and facilitate overfishing, we are wiping that species out. Similarly with blue whiting, so that we were looking at a 41% reduction from the previous year's advice. And again, Norway, Faroe Islands, Iceland, UK, European Union have consistently exceeded the advised catches. And I do think there's, we've obviously had this discussion in the committee. Norway, Faroe Islands and Iceland are particularly problematic here, that they are allowed and facilitated to overfish a species to which they really should have no right. And I think that's certainly something that we as a country need to really get that message across to Europe. I do believe, though, Minister, that even though that the framework as it is set up, it is not working properly, I do believe that there are tools within that system that Ireland can use. I think, I don't know over the last number of years why we have not been able to negotiate stronger in relation to the quotas, why Ireland has not been getting a fair share of those quotas. But I do think it's really important. There's two important principles here. One is that the overall quotas stay within the species limits, the biological limits, and that they're evidence and science-based. That is the primary thing. If we don't get that right, there will be no fish for anybody. But within that quota, within that large cake that is determined to be there, Ireland needs to get its fair share. Like, that is the fundamental thing that we need to be fighting for. And if it's the case, we need to make sure that we have alliances going in Europe that can fight and will stand by us on that. That's really important. I don't know why we have always gotten the short end of this stick. I just don't understand it. I'm not in the room. Previous ministers might have a better understanding, but it's time for that to stop, and it's time for us to get our fair share. But as I said, I do believe that there are, even within the system that's there at the moment, I do think there are tools that we can use to ensure a more sustainable fishery and a better way of managing the fishery, and I think particularly for our inshore fishers. I do think that they have been ignored for far too long. I do believe that they are being squeezed into smaller and smaller geographical areas and also less and less species. And I think that in itself is putting huge pressure on the species that are there. I think they need to be a core focus of what you're doing and the work that you're doing. And I think, Minister, that we need to start looking at Article 7 within the Common Fisheries Policy and actually start implementing that. And that article allows for the fishing opportunities and for states to use transparent and objective criteria with a focus on social, environmental and economic criteria. So, Minister, that means that you can, within the Common Fisheries Policy, you can actually enable a much clearer focus on inshore fisheries, the low-impact fishers. That's really what we want to have, low-impact fishers. And you can actually direct resources, more resources to them under this provision, and I do not understand why we have not used that provision. So I would really ask you to look into that seriously, Minister. I also would ask you to look into, because previously there was an issue with hake off the southwest of Ireland. It's a nursery ground for hake, and in 2003 Ireland established, under the conditions of the EU, a biologically sensitive area, and that enables restriction of certain types of fishing within an area based on its importance as a nursery area. I think essentially that might be something that you can look at to actually deal with the blue whiting issue, because obviously the nursery area that's currently under trouble, I mean, that could actually that provision could be used for that, and I would just ask that you look into it and look at essentially those biologically sensitive areas seem to be a precursor to the marine protected areas. And Minister, I would also absolutely urge you to get that marine protected area legislation in place. If that is done properly, it not only will protect our stocks, it will protect our inshore fishers as well. Like, if it is done really well, it will actually increase fishing potential for people. So it needs to be done urgently. I again would plead that you have it as a standalone piece of legislation, that you don't just tack it on to something else, because I just don't think that's going to give it the sufficient focus that it requires. But please, just get that done. We've been too long waiting, and in the meantime, we're seeing stock collapse after stock collapse, and we're seeing our fishing industry collapse as well. I also just want to mention in my last minute, you mentioned sprat earlier on in your speech, Minister, and the fact that it was an inshore fishery measure, the banning of the over 18 metre boats. I will just say that it is reckless of you not to put in a quota on the under 18 boats. You can still ensure a proper fishery for the under 18 boats. You can still prioritise them, but there needs to be a quota. And the Marine Institute was very clear in this when they were into the committee, in the absence of any other data, in the absence of any other information, that the quota set by ICES was just 2,240 tonnes, that should be what's used. The precautionary principle needs to be used here. If you do not get this right, Minister, there may not be a fishery for some of those inshore boats, and it is short-sighted of you not to put a quota in. Thank you.
An Teachta Gibney.
Gurmagat Cahirlock, and I really welcome the opportunity today to speak about this vital topic, and I also want to acknowledge Deputy McLaughlin for his continued efforts to push for this, and your own attendance here, Minister, as the relevant Cabinet member. And there's a few points I really want to make today that really this is a community that has been consistently left behind, that it speaks to an area of my portfolio which is the trade and sustainable industry element, and I'm coming at this as our enterprise spokesperson. And then finally, that overfishing, as we've heard from many contributors today, is compounding these problems. So I want to focus today not just on the industry itself, but the lived reality of fishing communities across Ireland, the challenges that they face and the policy failures which are simply squeezing them out of existence. Ireland is an island nation with 12% of the EU's fishing grounds, and people along our coasts have made their livelihoods from the sea for generations, and it's absolutely vital that they can continue to do so for many more generations. But sadly, overfishing has led us to a place where the scientific advice is recommending drastic reductions in quotas, including 0 catches for cod, haddock and whiting. We can't have a fishing industry without fish. And we need to see policy which makes sure that we have plentiful stocks for years to come. And we also need to fix the pattern of overfishing, which has brought us here in the first place. We face immense challenges in this area when it comes to protecting our oceans, protecting our fishing communities, and protecting the jobs of people who live along our coasts. These are challenges that we need to take seriously and which we need to resolve as a matter of urgency. Because inshore fishers have been a community that we have consistently left behind. Up and down our coastlines, we have communities that traditionally were full of people who made their livelihood on the sea. For many of those communities, that way of life has been almost entirely wiped out in the last 50 years. Those who still do so, they have these jobs that they face decreasing incomes, depleted fish stocks, and lack of support in a job that is increasingly perilous. The Common Agricultural Policy has been a huge support to Irish farmers, but the Common Fisheries Policy has left Irish inshore fishers with a short straw on European fishing quotas. And this has been compounded since Brexit, where Irish inshore fishers lost another quarter of that quota. These communities, particularly up and down the Atlantic coastline, who have never been the most economically advantaged to begin with, are being pushed further to the margins. As I said, I come at this topic as my party's enterprise spokesperson, so I want to speak to the trade and sustainable industry components of that. And in this context, I have heard and said many times in this chamber that we need to find an economic model in Ireland that is not so reliant on FDI, that is stable and sustainable. And that means building up indigenous industry and protecting it into the future. We need a stable economy and a tax base that we can rely on in good times and bad, and which is guaranteed into the future in a world where few things are. There is a version of our fishing industry that can be all of those things: indigenous, stable and sustainable. But that vision of our fishing industry is not yet the reality. The reality instead is a way of life that is being squeezed out of existence. And it is galling to Irish inshore fishers and their communities, who are also dealing with a rising cost of living, who are also hearing how wonderful our economy is, that their margins are being squeezed tighter and tighter, and they certainly do not feel that their interests are being represented and fought for at national and EU level. We've seen the International Council for Exploration of the Sea call on the EU to significantly reduce fishing quotas, and our fishing stocks have drastically reduced, and we really are in a dangerous situation where fish cannot repopulate at the current rate of fishing. While small fishermen struggle to get by, huge factory trawlers are hoovering up fish stocks inside and outside of our waters. We need a common sense approach to fishing which protects our environment, protects fishing stocks and protects Irish inshore fishers, because right now we have a situation which does not do any of those things. Tá an saoil ar chósta agus ar oileán na hÉireann crua. Tuigeann na daoine seo go bhfuil an saoil sin crua. Tuigeann siad go bhfuil sé deacair, go bhfuil contúirt ann dóibh. Ach an rud nach féidir leo tuiscint, ná céin fáin nach bhfuil tacaíocht a bháil acu. We cannot ignore the crisis as it worsens year on year. We are facing a cliff edge of dwindling fish stocks, dwindling quotas, and an industry and community pushed further into the margins. Gurmagat.
Gurmagat an Teacht
Gurmagat Cahirlock. And as Ireland is a maritime nation, our waters are a strategic asset. Our fishing communities are a living heritage, and our policy choices now will decide whether the next generation can still make a livelihood from the sea. And I welcome today's debate and the government's continued investment in this sector. Since 2020, over €180 million has been invested in seafood, with a further €50 million for local piers and harbours, €157.7 million provided in Budget 2026 to keep that momentum going. That money matters on the ground: safer harbours, modern kit, real supports for crews and processors alike. I also welcome the re-establishment of the Minister of State role for Fisheries and Marine. And since his appointment earlier this year, Minister Dooley has moved quickly. Capital works in our fishery harbour centres, reciprocal access with the UK out to 2030 with no change to quotas, and the FLAG Coastal Community Scheme launched, and a dedicated skills plan through BIM to bring new entrants into modern professional seafood industry. These are practical measures that build resilience when margins are tight and crews are hard to find. There are major challenges ahead for the sector. ICES advice points to sharp reductions next year, a 70% signalled cut for mackerel, 41% for blue whiting and 22% for boarfish. For Ireland's most valuable species, that's very worrying. And the government has committed to work with industry on a pathway through this, but let's be honest, an adjustment of anything close to this level will bite. And it will bite hardest where communities are most dependent on narrow species mix. That's exactly why targeted investment, fleet efficiencies, skills and local value add are not just nice to haves, but they are survival tools. Let me turn to Dublin and the East Coast for a moment, where the pattern is distinctive. Howth, for example, is our designated fishery harbour centre in Dublin. It anchors a significant processing cluster and sustain hundreds of jobs across the value chain. Continued capital investment there, dredging, safety berths, utilities, it's essential to keep output high and to secure processing jobs and support families right across the wider Dublin area. That work is already funded this year under the National Capital Allocation for FHCs, and let's keep it moving at pace. But Dublin's story is bigger than just one harbour. Along the coast, we have small inshore fleets working pots for brown crab and lobsters, from Skerries to Clogherhead down to Bullock Harbour in Dalkey, Kilmore Quay and Dunmore East. The decision to prohibit trawling by vessels over 18 metres inside the 6-mile zone helps restore that link between local resources and indeed local boats. And we support that policy, and we want to see the benefits land locally. I have two practical asks for Dublin Bay. Firstly, Dáil Éireann Harbour. It's not a fishery harbour centre, but it is a major harbour with slipways, a public boat yard, fuel and water and easy logistics. I want to see it utilised further for inshore activity. That means designating a modest working area in the Cole or Ode Harbour for time-limited commercial landings by small crafts, providing hose points, shore power, securing gear storage so pots aren't competing with leisure users, as well as boat and craft repairs. None of that turns Dáil Éireann into a second Howth. However, it would make a real difference for inshore crews and for restaurants who want local catch on local plates. Secondly, Bullock Harbour itself, the tradition of lobster potting from Bullock is part of our coastal identity in Dáil Éireann. Let's back it with targeted micro-measures, small gear grants, safe haul out and storage, a seasonal conversion plan developed with fishers, and young entrant supports tied to the BIM training so that new skippers can step aboard with competence and confidence. And if we want the tradition to endure, we should make it a little easier and a lot safer to work from Bullock. Across the East Coast, there's bigger coexistence agenda too. Offshore renewable energy is coming. Survey vessels are already using our ports, and build-out will intensify. The State's Seafood ORE working group is the right forum, and now we need its output nailed down in practical protocols. Chartered corridors, fair compensation for disruption, and opportunities for fishing vessels to earn income on survey, and guard duty work without being lost to the fleet. But Dublin Bay and Dáil Éireann Harbour can be a national exemplar of good practice here, climate action and coastal livelihoods rowing in the same direction. We need to help keep pulling EU levers. Ireland has fought and must keep fighting for fair outcomes under the CFP and in annual quota rounds. With the EMFAF funding already underpinning our seafood development programme, we should ring-fence the next MFF so fishery supports are stable through cycles. And as we prepare for the 2026 review milestones under the UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement, Ireland's bottom line is clear: defend our access, defend our share, and make sure landing support processing and jobs at home. And finally, skills and safety, BIM's Next Wave plan is investing in people we need: skippers, engineers, processors, business skills, and that must continue. If we want young people to choose that life, we owe them modern kit, predictable income, and a harbour they can come home to. That is how we keep the knowledge alive, and how to set a string, read a tide, and bring a boat and crew back safe. To sum up, though, investing in Howth, unlock practical inshore facilities at Dún Laoghaire, safeguard and support lobster potting at Bullock, and manage ORE so fishers are partners, and hold our line in Brussels and London while riding out the stock cycle. If we do that, we will continue the next generation in Dublin and on the East Coast, and at ports around the island. We'll see a future at sea. Gormagat.
For months now, we in Sinn Féin and my colleague Pádraig McLaughlin have been calling on the government to allow statements on fisheries to take place in this House. So I welcome the opportunity today to finally debate the future of an industry that is absolutely at breaking point. An industry that has been failed by successive governments and abandoned by Brussels, but we now see an accumulation of years of neglect to get to this point where we are in absolute crisis. Across our coastal communities, from Donegal to Cork, from Mayo to Wexford, families who have fished these waters for generations are facing devastation. The latest international scientific advice has confirmed what many feared: a 70% cut to the mackerel quota, alongside severe reductions to blue whiting and to boarfish. These are not abstract figures. They are the difference between survival and collapse for Irish fishing communities. So let us be clear about what has happened here. For years, non-EU fleets from countries such as Norway, Iceland and Russia, among others, have engaged in reckless overfishing of mackerel and other shared stocks. The EU Commission has stood idly by. Year after year, they have expressed concern, but taken no action. Now the punishment falls not to those who broke the rules, but to those who played by them. Ireland, a state that controls 12% of EU waters, yet receives less than 6% of the quotas, is once again being made to pay the price for the failures of others. The reality is that the common fisheries policy is broken. It is unjust and it's ineffective and fundamentally anti-Irish. It rewards those who overfish and over-penalise and those who protect the resource. It has allowed foreign super trawlers to plunder our waters while our own fleets are being decommissioned. If the EU continues down this road, our seafood sector could collapse within a year, wiping out 2,000 jobs and hundreds of millions in exports. For fishing communities, such as in my own constituency in Mayo and around the coast, this is an absolute crisis, and that is why Sinn Féin is calling for urgent action. The government must immediately enter negotiations with the European Commission on an emergency financial package to sustain our fishing and seafood industry through this crisis. Those who have been punished for compliance must not be left to sink while the EU dithers. And secondly, we need a radical reset of the common fisheries policy and for the Irish government to fight for a fair share of our own waters. We also need sanctions against the rogue states that continue to overfish, and we need transparency around who within the EU benefits from these cosy arrangements. It is vital for our fishing industry that our voice in Brussels is finally heard loud and clear. Our message is simple: enough is enough. The day of polite diplomacy and weak negotiation are over. Ireland's coastal and island communities deserve fairness and sustainability and respect. Our fishermen are not asking for favours, they're asking for justice. They are asking for a future in the industry that built their communities and fed our nation. Sinn Féin will continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with them in Brussels and in this House and in every town and village across the island. I want to say a few words about the inshore sector. The inshore fleet is a vital part of our Irish fishing sector, with almost 2,000 vessels. They provide over half of the employment in our seafood industry, sustaining coastal communities across the island. We would continue the proud history and tradition of Irish inshore fishing by collaborating with the sector and putting in place supports to ensure the sector's growth. So Sinn Féin's priorities for the inshore sector include revisiting, relaunching and implementing the Irish Inshore Fisheries Sector Strategy 2019 to 2023 in full, theme by theme, objective by objective and action by action, by adequately resourcing the recently established Inshore and Islands Producers Organisation and the National Inshore Fishermen's Association and the Irish Islands Marine Resource Organisation, working with all sectors of the Irish fishing industry to ensure a fair and reasonable distribution of our mackerel and our herring quota and the quota of other species as they arise. Working with inshore fishermen and their representatives to identify new quota and non-quota fishing opportunities, to build and to grow new markets and to identify financial and other types of supports that can be availed of during these turbulent times. Developing a continuity grant that can be accessed by the inshore and islands fishing sector to promote growth and revitalise our communities, to enact and implement the Islands Fisheries Heritage Licence Bill 2017. Minister, we really have to take this serious. What's happening here? Thank you.
Come on. Charles Ward.
It's hard not to feel completely hopeless about the fishing industry at this minute, but what was once a prosperous industry is now facing complete collapse. It's utter devastation, Minister, as you are well aware. The numbers have been outlined multiple times already, but I think it's important that they are repeated until we get to grips of what we are facing and the potential impact. The International Council for Exploration of the Sea have advised the following cuts starting next year: a 70% cut in mackerel, a 41% cut in blue whiting, a 22% cut in boarfish, a 71% cut in Irish sea whiting, a 59% cut in Irish sea plaice, and a 30% cut in Irish sea haddock. As well as these cuts and other fish species are expected, a cut in Dublin Bay prawn is expected next week. Our fishing industry faces losing up to €200 million. Minister, you know these numbers. We have discussed these at length over the last number of months in the fishing committees, because the response from the government has been extremely underwhelming. It's completely a deficit attitude that the government regarding our fishing. It's these cuts in the industry's decline have already been, it's like they've been accepted. And we have no control over what happens in our waters, but we should have. We have spent so long pandering to Europe that we have completely forgotten our own value and our value in our own fishing industry. Ireland holds about 12% of the EU waters, but is allocated less than 6% of the fishing quota. We're literally getting back half of what we have, and we allow it. We allow Europe and other countries to consistently take, and which they do. In 2010, Iceland and the Faroe Islands increased their own mackerel quotas without consulting the countries that had shared interest in these stocks, and we let them. In 2021, the Faroe Islands and Norway raised their mackerel and quotas without agreement with the EU, despite Ireland being the most reliant on them, and we let them. In 2013, the Faroe Islands increased their own allowance by herring by 229%, and we allowed it. And in 2020, following the Brexit Trade Cooperation Agreement, 40% of the total value of European quotas were transferred to the UK from Ireland, and we let Europe sell away our own half. We let them. Extremely damaging this deal, and it's cost the fishing industry an estimated $180 million to date. In 2024, the UK signed an agreement with Norway and the Faroe Islands, dividing up 70% of the mackerel between them without involving the EU. We let them get away with that one again. Today, vessels from the EU states, as well as fleets from the Southern Hemisphere, fish bluefin tuna, a lucrative species in our waters, while Irish fishermen are forced to observe this because Europe has not allowed us to access this stock. French and British vessels continue to fish sea bass on our very doorstep, while we haven't been able to fish this since the 1990s, and yet again we let them away with it. Much more they're allowed to do. How much longer are we going to let Europe and other countries take advantage of us? If any other industry this was happening, there'd be a complete uproar. But the fishing industry gets ignored and undervalued again and again, despite being a massive part of this country's culture and our heritage, as well as a massive economic asset. BIM reported that in 2024, Ireland's seafood economy generated 1.24 billion in GDP. The sector sustained over 16,800 direct and indirect jobs across the whole fishing services and other services outside that. Yet the government fails to take action. It fails to protect this industry, the jobs, the people who have made this industry their livelihoods. Worse that, they continue to support the very mechanisms, the policies that actively hurt the industry. In your budget at the beginning of the month, the government stated that they intended to support fully the implementation of a common fisheries policy. Basically, you're seeking to support the very outdated policy that we know is causing these significant cuts. I understand that the total allowance catch numbers are set annually at EU level for each region and each fish species. Ireland then received their percentage through the TAC. The percentage reflects the size of the scope of the Irish fishing industry during the 1970s, which is half a century ago. Hence the reason that we have no bluefin tuna quota, given that there was no recorded landings over 50 years ago, which quite frankly is ridiculous in this day and age. The country and the fishing industry have changed astronomically at this time. It's clear that this policy holds us back. Yet your government calls for full implementation of the common fishing policy. This speaks to a government that is completely and totally out of touch with the fishing industry at the moment. I know that the European Commission is currently evaluating the common fisheries policy, but the review has been going on far too long. The cuts we face are due to take place in less than 3 months. We don't have time to wait. Armageddon is coming. There is no doubt that our industry will be completely wiped out if any further quota cuts are enforced, never mind a 70% cut in mackerel. Ireland's tax share of mackerel more than any other species, and its value supports more of the fish industry than any other significant margin. Yet it seems the government's negotiation strategy is not to reject such devastating quota cuts, but allow for a lesser cut and apply for the Hague preferences, a small additional allowance to patch it up rather than trying to fix the root problem. It is disappointing that the government consistently takes such a weak negotiation stance when it comes to fishing. This is why we're so desperate to please Europe that it's at the detriment to our own fisheries and our own citizens. It's not fair that the Irish fishers are forced to bear the brunt of weak government that do not seem to have the best interest of the fisheries at heart. Coming from a coastal community myself, an island community, I can tell you further quotas will cause catastrophic damage, and we shouldn't be immune to hearing this, Minister. Our fishing communities are barely surviving as it is. Being from Donegal, I see firsthand every day it takes entire towns and communities to make towns successful. Killybegs is one example. Killybegs was a thriving town, but it's in decline. The next few months and these decisions will determine the future of that place. Killybegs has had a history of fishing. It has raised families in fishing. But right now, as we speak, there's fish factories that are not going. There's boats tied up. Coming from an island myself, my own community in Armore, where fishing has been an important part of our island's history, the history has been erased with every cut, every time we're treated unfairly as far as I'm concerned. So many of our island piers and harbours lack the basic services such as electricity, waste collection and lighting, and a water supply. There's problems in many inshore fisheries face this too. On top of that, discrimination of our smaller fisheries. The fact that inshore fisheries are denied funding from the Brexit Adjustment Reserve, almost the entire mackerel and herring quota is given just 50 large vessels owned by about 2 dozen, is extremely unfair. These people now face an uncertain Christmas. They face an uncertain future. This is solvable. The right government and political will. Minister, you have the will to do this. You have to do this, because if you don't do this, we are facing an Armageddon with the fishing industry all over Ireland. And I believe you have to go in hard and you have to fight for the people. and the fisheries.
Thank you, Deputy Ward. Teachta Farrell, please.
You know well the community that I represent. I know that you've spent time in those coastal communities that I represent in Galway. And, you know, we talk about Connemara, we talk about 4 offshore islands in Galway West, whose lifestyles are completely interwoven with the sea and with fishing. And it really is a way of life. And anyone who is familiar with fishing communities knows the importance of European fishing quotas and of states respecting these quotas. And this is why it is so important for our government to represent the interests of hard-working Irish fishermen when negotiating our quotas and representing their interests in Europe. I'm very regularly contacted by fishermen who are asking for a bluefin tuna quota, which I have previously raised with yourself, Minister. Understandably, our fishing communities are absolutely furious that non-EU third states are overfishing with absolutely no repercussions. And this has led to recent scientific recommendations to cut fishing quotas of species like mackerel, which is very important to our fishing communities and would be absolutely devastating for it. This is why it's so shameful that certain Irish MEPs voted for the agreement, which would hand over Irish fishing territory and quotas to Norway and Iceland in return for funding. Meanwhile, Ireland won't see a red cent of that money, despite these concessions. This is bad for Ireland and turns its back on our fishing communities. But along with Independent Labour and Independent Ireland MEPs, all four Fianna Fáil MEPs supported it, which is particularly concerning considering Fianna Fáil holds the ministry responsible for fisheries. Our fishing communities need us all to stand up for them internationally, to protect our quotas and negotiate deals that will support our coastal communities and not leave them on their own. We can't reward states that overfish our waters with higher quotas. We need the EU to take action to ensure that all states fish responsibly, based on the science, and we need a better deal for Irish fishermen. We need justice and fairness for our Irish fishing communities once and for all. Ara tása go maith cho tábhachtachas atá cuasaí iascaireachta I Connemara agus na Hille na Machan Costa thar timpeall na Gaillimh agus tá ceithre cíán. Agus tuige muid cé cho tábhachtach is atá iascaireacht gon acnámaíocht a chomála sin gon síl atá ag na daoine ann. Agus chuann sé frustrachas uasach iascairí nuair eagann siad céir de Orleans one level na Hórapa agus Naontas Eorpach agus an bailach go maithíonn siad nach bhfuil an méid atá ag tasú wethab really a chur núil ag an rialtas ná ag Fisheries Eorpacha áirithe one an Naontas Eorpach. Níl sé soach maith go bhfuil siad ag phalangt, níl sé soach maith go bhfuil siad ag strachailt marall seo agus tá sé fíorthábhachtach go n-oibriú chulagan an seo sa seomra seo le chéile chun cinntiú go bhfuil díol níos ár ag iascairí na hÉireann agus tá sé haram go ndéanach muid seo mar tá san le blianta nús le isócha fiche tríocha cearcha bliana nús ní raibh sé seo déanta. Agus níos tá ara an, tá tusa an mar ara agus tá sé haram go núsáidir for an ról sin chuna seo cinntiú.
Deputy Collins, most of
Thank you very much indeed, Chairperson. Minister, first of all, I'd like to thank the Chief Whip for making this statements here possible today. And Deputy McLaughlin and myself pushed very hard for this debate, which is of huge importance at this present time. Minister, I would like this to be an honest debate. I don't want to be standing here speeching and not getting answers. I would like to get answers to the questions I'm putting to you. I want us to work together to save our fishing industry, and this is where we're at. The proposed 70% mackerel cut in the European Union's mackerel fishing quota will wipe out the industry in Ireland. I was at a meeting for TDs and senators the other night. I'll tell you, Minister, the fishermen of Ireland are well pissed off, pardon my language, with successive governments hanging them out to dry. The word that was used when describing what's happening in the fishing industry is Armageddon, and that's what Deputy Ward mentioned there. In the fishermen's own words, they are saying it's a total collapse of the sector if current trends continue. It's irreparable damage to coastal communities, livelihoods in the marine economy. The fishermen say it's a point of no return, where without immediate and decisive intervention, recovery may be impossible. They use the word Armageddon to wake up policymakers, and that's you, ministers, unless you want to see the end of an era for Irish fishing. My God, Minister, do you know what is one of the biggest costs in the Cork County Council at this present time? It's repairing the road into Castletownbere from what? From damage done by Spanish lorries going into Castletownbere numerous times weekly, loading Irish fish from Spanish boats, mind you, while our Irish boats are tied up with empty tanks. And those trucks driving out of Castletownbere causing the world of damage to the road. It's astonishing. You couldn't make it up in a cartoon or a comedy because no one would believe it. Minister, today I'm not just a representative of my constituents, but I'm a voice for the coastal communities of Ireland who are being systematically dismantled by the failures of fishery policy both at home and in Europe. The figures speak for themselves. In just the past 7 years, our Irish fleet has suffered estimated losses of 90 to 100 million. This is not just a financial crisis, it's a cultural and community catastrophe. Mackerel quotas slashed by 77%, costing us 66 million. Blue whiting down 41%, a 7.5 million blow. Prawns reduced by 12 to 13%, costing 4.8 million. Entire fleets are being shut down. The Celtic Sea Fleet is effectively grounded. The Irish Sea Fleet is barely operational. Ports like Castletownbere, Union Hall, Dunmore, East Clorhead, Howth, Kilmore, Key, Killybegs and Greencastle are facing existential threats. Minister, 17 boats are taken off Castletownbere alone in the most recent decommissioning scheme. There are not just boats, there are livelihoods, traditions and futures. Despite Ireland contributing 12% of EU waters, we receive just 6% of the fish. This is grotesque imbalance. Our fishermen are being asked to stop fishing in their own waters, while foreign vessels continue to exploit these stocks. Where is the fairness? Where is the sovereignty? The common fisheries policy compounded by the Brexit trade and cooperation agreement has failed Ireland. Stocks are declining, even though our fishermen have reduced their catches year after year. ICES now describes the situation in the Celtic and Irish seas as particularly concerning, with many stocks falling below critical biomass thresholds. We are being punished for our compliance. Minister, we need 1. Immediate financial aid to support our fleet and communities. 2. A succession plan to ensure the future of Irish fishing. And 3. A legal challenge to the EU's policy failure if necessary. The legal mechanism exists. Article 263, 265 and 340 of the TFEU to challenge unlawful conduct, failure to act and seek damages. If our government will not act, then we on this side of the House and the fishermen must consider doing this ourselves. We also demand the application of Hague preferences to allow our fishermen to remain legal in their own waters. And what a bluefin tuna. Despite a massive recovery in stock numbers, Ireland receives no quota, only a bycatch allowance. This is unacceptable. What about our fishing rights off of Rockall? Have we got those rights back? Are we going to get them back? Or is this another kick in the you-know-what for the Irish fishermen? Minister, this is not just about fish. It is about fairness. It is about the survival of our coastal communities. It is about Ireland's right to fish in Irish waters. Minister, can you confirm what emergency financial aid package is being considered to address the estimated 90 to 100 million in losses suffered by the Irish fleet? 2. What is your response to the fact that 17 boats were removed from Castletownbere alone under the most recent decommissioning scheme? What continued support is being offered to those families and communities? 3. Why does Ireland, which contributes 12% to the EU waters, receive only 6% of the fish? What steps are being taken to correct this imbalance? 4, I wish you'd take it down because these are very serious questions, and these are questions from the fishermen, not from Michael Collins. And I appreciate you would, if you can answer them, I would greatly appreciate it, and they would greatly appreciate it. 4, will you commit to pushing for the application of the Hague preferences to ensure Irish fishermen can legally fish in their own waters? 5, why has Ireland been denied a dedicated quota for bluefin tuna, despite a clear recovery in stock levels and historical fishing effort? 6, do you accept that the common fisheries policy and the Brexit trade and cooperation agreement have disproportionately harmed Ireland's fishing sector? 7, will the government consider initiating a legal challenge under the Articles 263, 265 or 340 of the TFEU to seek redress for these policy failures? How do you explain the continued decline in fish stocks, despite Irish fishermen reducing their catches over the past 7 years? 9. What is your position on ICES recommending zero tax for key species in the Celtic and Irish seas, effectively shutting down entire fleets? 10. What is the government's plan for succession and recruitment in the fishing industry to ensure its long-term survival? 11. Will you commit to a full review of Ireland's share of blue whiting, given the massive biomass and the unfair allocation of just 59,000 tonnes from a TAC of over 1.4 million tonnes? 12. Are you ministers going to agree on the 70% proposed cuts of mackerel quotas? And what is your plan for other quotas for these fishermen who want to work in the sea? I urge you to stand with these fishermen. And Minister, as I said, I did have a meeting with them, and it is at crisis point. It's at crisis point without ever a worry of a 70% mackerel. Well, that's over, game over for them. They know it's game over for them. People that have invested, fishermen, and I mainly talk. I've been down in Wexford. I've been in different ports meeting with fishermen, but the same down in West Cork. People spend millions of euros investing in their boats and in their fleet and in their staff and in their whatever. And to think that this is what's facing them, they're facing ruination, and it's a very, very serious crisis. And I urge you to stand with us, fight for our fishermen, demand reform, and if reform is denied, then let us challenge the injustice in the courts of Europe. Thank you.
Minister, I want to raise the very serious issue that is happening in my own constituency in Mayo, and that is the proposed closure of the Cong hatchery. This facility is one of the most important pieces of infrastructure in Mayo. It is fundamentally important. It is the jewel in the crown of the tourism sector in South Mayo. Cong, Ballinrobe and much of South Mayo, and indeed Galway, relies on this really important angling and tourism sector. And the IFI, the Inland Fisheries Ireland, are proposing to close this hatchery. And why this is important, Minister, it is really important that you understand that the hatchery was established in the 1960s. It was established as a result of a near wipeout of salmon stocks. And the IFI created the hatchery. They imported genetics from abroad, and it has been hugely successful in terms of replenishing the near wipeout of salmon stocks across the Corrib. And indeed, much of the smolts that are produced have a hugely success rate in terms of leaving our shores, travelling across North America and returning. And Minister, the IFI decided to close without any environmental assessment. In fact, I've written to you, I've submitted parliamentary questions, and I was amazed with the response. Minister, I asked what analysis was done in terms of the fish stocks in the region. No analysis was done. I also asked you, Minister, what impact was done in terms of the tourism sector in South Mayo and Connemara, and the reply was astonishing. Because the hatchery in the 1960s was not established for the purposes of tourism, that no impact assessment would be done. What kind of a response is that? The Cong has developed, and South Mayo has developed on this really important piece of infrastructure, and no impact is done. There are hundreds of jobs and businesses that rely on tourism in South Mayo, and this is a really important aspect that must be considered. So, Minister, I'm asking you to consider the impact of tourism. I'm asking you to consider the impact that it will have on fish stocks in the region. I also want to highlight to you, Minister, that the report that was published by NASCO is being used to essentially close the Cong hatchery. But the fact is that NASCO actually recognises that well-managed hatcheries can play an important role in conservation of our fish stocks. The science used to justify the closure indeed manipulates the international guidance and overlooks Cong's really valuable service. And I asked, Minister, in terms of the assessment that was done in terms of the fish stocks that are produced in Cong, and no data was provided. No data. Like, this hatchery should be used as a flagship hatchery. It should be a model upon which to follow, a place that we can go and learn and research, and an education facility. And I have no doubt, Minister, that if we see an epidemic that we saw in the Blackwater of an environmental disaster, we will absolutely rue the day that we close this. We will rue the day, and I'm asking you, this will cost millions of euros to re-establish down the line. I'm asking you, Minister, before this is closed, I'm asking you to join me in Cong, visit the facility, see the valuable contribution. It's just 2 hours away from County Clare. I'll join you at the facility in Cong at any point of your choosing, Minister. But I'm asking you to pause. I'm asking you to reflect. I'm asking you to intervene, to understand what's at stake here for the entire region, not just for tourism, but in terms of the salmon stocks in South Mayo. It is fundamentally important. Minister, will you commit to visiting Cong Hatchery before the IFA close this facility?
Minister, lots of issues have been raised by my colleagues, particularly Dr. McLaughlin and McGuinness, in relation to quotas, in relation to an existential threat facing fishermen, and in relation to policy, European policy and state policy. So I support all of that and all of the points that they made. I do, Minister, want to concentrate on infrastructure if I can, because it is really important. I know that you visited Waterford recently, and one of the points of discussion was Helvig Harbour and Helvig Pier. Minister, it's quite clear to anybody that's looking at this, because we in Sinn Féin have been raising this issue now for years in relation to the need to develop those harbours, and Helvig Pier falls under the local authority harbours programme. And the problem is that, one, it doesn't get enough funding, and two, it's not able to do the engineering or the environmental studies, as you know, and that creates problems then for projects to be done. And everybody gets sent around the houses, and we go around in circles, and the work doesn't get done. So I think there does need to be reform of how funding is provided in the first instance, particularly to those local authority harbours. And Helvig being one of them, there's obviously others across the state as well. I also want to raise with you, Minister, the issue of Dunmore East Harbour. And it's an issue that I have been raising now for a long number of years in relation to the development of that harbour. It actually is a shining example of what can be done in relation to marine tourism, in relation to water sports activity. There's lots going on there during the summer. There's an adventure playground where young children can go out and swim in the harbour. And obviously there's fishing boats there. Sometimes we have cruise ships that come in, and it's all fantastic. The problem is that they can't all coexist in the current harbour, because it just isn't sufficient. There was a study commissioned by the department a number of years ago. It was a very good study. It was a feasibility study on what was needed to ensure that we can maximise the potential of Dunmore East Harbour. It outlined 4 options, ranging from, I think, 17 million to 45 million. Nothing was done, Minister, not a thing. Dropped off the face of the earth, dropped off a cliff, and I haven't seen anything from government, anything from the department since. In fact, despite the fact that I was putting parliamentary questions in before the last well before the last general election, trying to get a sense as to what happened here. Where did it go? We didn't get any response. So I would just ask the Minister to look into that feasibility study.
Minister, as a coastal TD, I've seen firsthand the decline in the fishing industry. The sector has suffered quota cuts, fleet reductions, fuel pressures. The input cost increase in recent years has left them facing crisis after crisis, and following decades of neglect, mismanagement and weak negotiating on their behalf by successive Fianna Fáil and Gael-led governments. And I want to touch on something, because people have mentioned quotas and different stocks and so on, but I want to give you a real-life story here. A gentleman, Mr. C.J. Gaffney, a perfect example of the incredible damage that has been done and has continued to be done to the Irish fishing industry. It's literally been gutted, and pardon the pun for that, but in 2007, CJ purchased the Dutch trawler Mary Kate and subsequently found that it had serious stability issues which made the boat uninsurable. After trying to take legal action in Holland and in Germany, as it was German registered, without success, he took out a loan to cover the considerable cost of fixing that boat. Despite finishing the repairs in 2012 at an eye-watering cost to himself, CJ had been unable to earn a living fishing the boat for so long that he was forced to sell it. A UK buyer was found, but due to the boat's history, he could not sell it. It could not be registered in the UK as a fishing fleet, so he had to surrender the boat to the bank in 2012, along with his fishing licence, and was left with debts of over €1 million. The decade-long crusade has left CJ emotionally and financially spent, with petitions to the European Commission and to the Irish Government to see if they could draw down EU funds from the European Fisheries Fund in compensation, but that's falling on deaf ears. Now dismantled, her fate has resonated deeply in many coastal communities across the country who have been ignored by consecutive governments. Questions need to be answered by this government and by the EU as how to this beam trawler was issued with a stamped stability book from a renowned international classification society, and this had serious maritime safety implications. The Gaffney family deserve compensation for this ordeal, and we need to ensure that no other family will ever face the same injustice.
It was great to see you there with the local fishermen, with the people who are engaged with all local businesses in Beneder. I think it's very important as well to have been at that table, to talk to the local fishermen. You saw how hard and how big the local economy is based on fishing. Holt is a huge tourist attraction. You know yourself, Americans come to this beautiful, beautiful capital city. They get the bus out to Holt, they go on the walk, they see the fishermen, they eat the fresh fish. And there's so many jobs based on that. And listen, Minister, the main thing that you know from that meeting is the dredging of the harbour. There's a huge delay at the moment. I understand the EPA has a reason. There are issues that need to be looked at, but I'm wondering, can your department look at speeding that up? Because there are some estimates showing that there is nearly 220,000 metres cubed material that needs to be removed. Now, I know we have to do that sensitively, as there is a lot of marine life around the area. But clearance of this material, Minister, would restore depth and safety and ensure navigation of all craft. At the moment, I had some residents in Howth that were saying there was incidents where the lifeboat was having difficulty in certain areas of the port itself. Speaking on which, I'd like to say, could your department look at ways to expedite the environmental authorisation, while mainly with the rigorous safeguards? Minister, I'd like to also reinforce the long discussion we did have on the boat lift, the synchro lift that's currently there. The current lift that has been there is 40 years old. Sadly, the parts for that lift aren't available anymore. So if that could be looked at if that lift was out of capability to be able to work, all of those local fishermen, all those local boats, all of those local businesses, the fishmongers, the restaurants, the boat developers, everyone who's there won't be out of work, and the local economy will definitely be damaged. I was on the phone to a local fisherman today, Minister, and it's essential that this infrastructure be upgraded. Also, Minister, just speaking on the dredging again, the boat access linked to the dredging issues is in fact that there has been cases where there is inefficient at low tide on certain channels. Minister, just listen to other members of the House speak about EU fishing laws, and we saw how the fishermen spoke to you that day. I know you did engage with them. I know we do kind of have our hands tied when it comes to EU laws. But Minister, I'm wondering, is there a way that what those fishermen did ask you to expedite, could you look into that? And I look forward to welcoming you back to Howth to open up the boat lift in the next month or two, is it? Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to get the opportunity to talk on behalf of the fishing industry and, I suppose, the coastal communities in general, because when the fishermen can't make money and don't make money, the coastal communities, of course, are affected, adversely affected. And we have to give credit to the British going back to the 1600s. They built up the fishing industry in Ireland, and gave the local people at the time the whereas to get the fishing industry going, which we carried on through thick and thin for many years. But since our accession to the EU, we've lost much of our fishing quotas to the detriment of Irish fishermen and to the coastal communities that I have mentioned. Indeed, all that has been done for them was to pay some of them, and we see the grand presentations that they made to us in front of the Wind Centre over where the Dáil was held while this place during the COVID or whatever. But we see the grand orderly fashion that they came in, so many of them, and made their presentation. And each and every one of them are hurting, and I always think of them for the meticulous way they made their presentation. There was no repetition. Each of them had their own amount to say and said it eloquently, and we're still, I don't think we've done enough for the ministers, and we need to. And there's one thing that I know anyway, is I haven't seen or tasted a mackerel for almost 3 years. And I was, like all of us, very fond of them. They're not to be seen anymore. Where are they gone, ministers? I don't know. But they're not, I remember even people from Kilgarvan who go back down to Valentia and fish off the rocks there. And even we lost one great man there, Ned Carey, from Coolick in Kilcummin. And it was such a thing at the time, but I'm told there's no mackerel to be had now. And there's serious concerns as well as we lose the old quotas. The pair trawling in Kimere Bay. When is that going to be addressed and fair play meted out? Because what's happening is the larger trawlers are coming in and cleaning the whole thing out, every kind of fish. And I'm actually blaming that for the fact that I can't get a mackerel, or the people of Kilgarvan or anyone else around us. Where are they gone, or where are they going? I mean, it's not fair. No one person should own anything like that, or no large entity should be able to clean out a place like that. And all I'm asking for is fair play. I don't want to put them people out of business either, but we have to see after the smaller people. The Joe Jims who are now dead, and Donald Shea who's braved the elements, and they said the fishing was better on the bad day when the wind and the rain was blowing. That was when they were out at their best, because the fishing, they seemed to get the fish at that in those conditions. But we need to address that, and we've been promised for so long, and there's so many people along to Sist and back the way to Argroom and back to the Bearhaven, concerned about that. People around Kilmaclogue, and they're always mentioning it. So then the one thing that I pride in is these fish lorries go up through Kilgarvan village late at night. They're getting fewer, but there was something in it. You'd like to see them passing, and they go back empty, they go up full. But there's not as many of them now. Why is that? We've lost our quotas, I'm told, and we need to ensure the continuation of the people in the rural communities, like down along the Iveragh Peninsula and all the way around to Dingle. We need to retain the coastal communities and keep them going, because fishing did keep them people traditionally in business and kept the local shop going, kept the local pub going. And it's not just the fishermen, I'm saying, it is whole communities that depended and prided on their fishermen. We're losing that, and I'm asking you to fight harder for quotas and get what rightfully belongs to us, because we seem to have left a lot of it slip. Successive governments, I'm not blaming you now, but this is your time to get into action and make a map for yourselves and ensure that you get the respect that we needed to get in from the fishing communities and the coastal communities, because they're very important to us to keep. I mean, we seem to have a shortage of housing everywhere, but the biggest cry is here in Dublin. We need to spread out and diversify and have enough people living in the rural parts of Ireland as well. It can't be all about Dublin. We must remember the people that are braving the elements on the western seaboard and trying to eke out a living. We have to see after those as well. Thank you very much, Minister.
Okay, and I call on the Minister to make his concluding statement.
Good, Cathaoirleach, and can I start by thanking deputies for their engagement in what is a really important debate here on the important issues in respect of fisheries. And just to say, you know, it's very evident from the debate here the impact and the concern across all our coastal communities, as raised by deputies here, particularly in Donegal and in Cork, where we know it's just such an intrinsic part of our economic activity. But as it is in Waterford, in Clare, in Dublin, which is sometimes forgotten in terms of coastal communities and economic activity. Clare, as Minister Dooley knows all too well, Mayo Deputy Lawless raised specific points there which relate to inland fisheries, and Minister Dooley will come back to wearing his other hat under the other department side, and the specific questions there Deputy Collins raised. In my 10 minutes here, I don't have time to go back through them all, but Minister Dooley will engage with you in correspondence on those very detailed specific points. But just to flag here, the waters around Ireland's 7,500 kilometre coastline have always been a source for remarkable seafood. Fishing remains of significant social and economic importance to Ireland, and for many of our coastal communities it is intrinsically linked to their identity and the way of life. This is a sector which employs over 15,000 people across fishing vessels, aquaculture sites, in processing operations and in the distribution of seafood, helping to sustain vibrant rural and coastal communities across Ireland. But right now it is a sector under significant pressure. I, along with Minister of State Dooley, share many of the concerns raised here during the course of this debate, particularly those in relation to the setting of fishing opportunities in 2026. As has been outlined on September 30th, ICES, the International Council for Exploration of the Seas, published deeply concerning advice for widely distributed pelagic stocks in 2026, depleted, including mackerel, blue whiting and boarfish. This has caused deep and understandable concern for the sector. Given the urgent nature of these concerns, Ireland will bring a point under any other business to the EU Agrifish Council next week on a call for urgent EU action to save North East Atlantic pelagic stocks. In this call for the European Commission to identify and adopt suitable measures to respond to this crisis, and in particular bring forward measures regarding third countries which fail to cooperate and that allow unsustainable fishing of a stock of common interest for the Union. Ireland will support the EU in taking a stand to engage constructively and as an equal partner with our fellow coastal states in the North East Atlantic on the sustainable management of our shared fisheries resources. However, we must send a clear signal that the EU will no longer tolerate actions which threaten the sustainability of this vital natural resource or the viability of the EU's seafood sector. In addition, we are committed to working across government to assess what supports may be available to the seafood sector in this very difficult context. Discussions are ongoing to explore options in this space within the constraints of both the EU and national exchequer funding and the relevant EU and national legislation. As regards bluefin tuna, which was highlighted here earlier, I fully understand the very strong lobby amongst Irish fishermen for Ireland to receive an allocation of the EU's bluefin tuna quota. Ireland has a national quota for northern albacore tuna. Annual catch limits are set by the International Commission for the Conservation of Atlantic Tunas based on scientific advice. Ireland does not have a national quota for bluefin tuna. The available bluefin tuna quota is allocated each year to member states based on a relative stability as established in the late 1990s. At that time, Ireland did not have a track record of commercial fishing for bluefin tuna and accordingly did not receive a quota allocation. However, a small bluefin tuna bycatch quota is available to Ireland primarily for use in our important northern albacore tuna fishery and Celtic sea herring fishery, where there can be bluefin tuna bycatch. In 2018, Ireland was successful for the first time in securing an agreement that allowed it to set up a catch tag release fishery to contribute to the collection of scientific data for the bluefin tuna stock. This catch tag release science-based fishery for authorised recreational angling vessels has been in place since 2019. And supports the collection of valuable data on the migratory patterns of bluefin tuna in Irish waters. This fishery is most beneficial to Ireland as it increases our knowledge of the behaviour and abundance of bluefin tuna while also providing a small but valuable tourism benefit to peripheral coastal communities. Ireland has made it clear to the EU member states and the European Commission that there is a case for an allocation of the EU's bluefin tuna quota to be made available to Ireland. The case is supported by the data collected in the catch tag release science-based fishery for authorised recreational angling vessels. Ireland has requested the opening of discussions at EU level to progress Ireland's case, and Ireland has made formal statements on the matter at numerous fisheries councils in recent years. Opening up this issue is difficult as other member states are resistant to any discussion on amending relative stability for this stock. As is the case across quota stocks in the EU, any change to relative stability would involve a loss for some other member states and therefore poses particular challenges in a qualified majority voting context. However, the case for a national quota for bluefin tuna is supported by the data collected in the catch tag release Science-Based Fishery for authorised recreational angling vessels, and I and Minister Dooley will continue to support our efforts on this at every available opportunity. The ongoing impacts of Brexit to the sector and the extension to EU-UK trade agreement have also been raised here. I know it's a significant frustration to the sector that Ireland did not get some quota back from the EU in the discussions which ended in May this year. The challenge we have faced in this area has been the comparative strength of the UK negotiating position to that of the EU's. UK vessels do not rely on access to the EU waters to fish to the same extent that EU vessels do. North Sea member states, France, Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, Denmark and Sweden are particularly reliant on access to the UK EEZ. While Irish vessels are not dependent, as we do fish approximately, we're not as dependent, we do fish approximately 1/3 of our catch in UK waters. Therefore, the 2020 EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement, the TCA, a strategic link was established between fisheries and energy. Without the agreement at the May summit, we faced the possibility of the UK either refusing to agree to a multi-year reciprocal access arrangement or seeking further quota transfers in order to agree to continued access for EU vessels. This was especially relevant as we approached the end of the adjustment period. This was critically important for Ireland as we suffered disproportionately on quota transfers in the TCA, and we were determined not to lose one more fish. Given the number of fish stocks shared between the EU and UK, over 80 stocks, it would not be feasible to negotiate and agree on access to waters and quotas on an annual basis. Therefore, the priority was to secure continuation of the current arrangements with continued reciprocal access and no further transfers in quota from the EU to the UK. Ireland sought the longest possible extension to the status quo on condition of there being no additional quotas transferred to the UK. The Fisheries Agreement sees an extension of 12 years to the status quo to June 2038, significantly longer than the 4 years previously sought by the United Kingdom. The certainty of an agreement to extend the reciprocal access for the EU and UK vessels to fish in each other's waters for a period of 12 years with no change to existing quota shares is therefore welcome and a much better outcome than some of the other possibilities. I also welcome the commitment to negotiation of a sanitary and phytosanitary SPS agreement between the EU and the UK. This will be based on dynamic alignment by the UK with the EU food safety standards and rules. There are long-established and mutually beneficial trading relationships between food producers in Ireland and food business and retailers in the UK. A comprehensive SPS agreement would greatly reduce the administrative burden on agri-food businesses exporting to the UK. Many of you have also raised the point of Rockall, both today and in previous debates, and the desire of Irish fishermen to return to fishing in the waters around Rockall, especially for squid. Rockall is a small uninhabitable rock located approximately 160 nautical miles west of the Scottish islands of St Kilda and 230 nautical miles to the northwest of Donegal, as we all know. Ireland has not sought to claim sovereignty over Rockall. The UK claimed sovereignty over Rockall in 1955 and sought to formally annex it as part of Scotland under its 1972 Island of Rockall Act. The consistent position of successive Irish governments is that Ireland does not recognise Britain's claim of sovereignty over Rockall. Accordingly, Ireland does not accept that a 12 nautical mile, 22 kilometre territorial sea exists around Rockall. We understand that the UK takes a different view. In addition, Rockall and similar rocks and skerries have no significance for generating an exclusive economic zone or establishing legal rights to the continental shelf. We believe this position is reflected in the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which provides at Article 121, paragraph 3, that rocks which cannot sustain human habitation or economic life of their own shall have no exclusive economic zone or continental shelf. I can assure the House that reaching an agreement on issues relating to Rockall remain an important issue for the Government, and the Department of Foreign Affairs is in ongoing contact with the relevant Scottish UK authorities in this regard. This is an area that I know Minister of State Dooley has committed to contributing constructively to in the months ahead, as he has in his time in this portfolio. In conclusion, Cathaoirleach, the programme for government recognises the valuable role of fisheries in this country. I am committed as Minister, alongside my government colleagues, to defending the interests of the Irish fishing sector and to securing a sustainable future for the sector. It is a sector that makes an invaluable contribution to our coastal communities and the rural economy, and we will continue to work on addressing the issues it faces on behalf of the communities that rely on that activity for their livelihood. thank you, and thank you to the County Corla's office for facilitating this really important debate today. Thank you very much.
That concludes statements on fisheries.